Before we begin, can my members and witnesses make sure mobile phones are turned off, please? Today we're dealing with the issue of the ANC's areas of national constraints. I'd like to welcome from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine Mr Paul Dillon, Assistant Secretary General, Mr Fintan O'Brien, Principal Officer, Mr Larry Cashman, Assistant Principal, Mr Thomas Harty, Assistant Principal. Thank you for coming forward to me today to brief the committee on the issue of the ANCs. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention the issue of privilege. Witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of evidence to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed to only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect of where possible you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official either by name in such way as to make him or her identifiable. Mr Dillon, now I ask you to make your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Chairman. At the outset, I'd like to thank the members of the committee for giving us the opportunity here today to update you on the changes to be made to the 2019 Areas of Natural Constraint Scheme. The Areas of Natural Constraint Scheme, ANC scheme, has been in existence in various forms in Ireland since the 1970s. It was previously called the Disadvantaged Area Scheme or the Less Favoured Area Scheme, and in its various iterations it has played a very important income support role for farmers in many areas of the country. To date, in 2018, some €216 million has been paid to 89,000 farmers under the scheme, and over the course of the scheme year, a total of €227 million will be paid to 96,000 farmers. This is indicative of the importance and size of the scheme in Ireland. So why the new approach to designating the eligible lands under the scheme? Well, up until 2018, Ireland had identified areas eligible under the scheme using a range of socio-economic indicators, such as family farm income, population density, percentage of the working population engaged in agriculture, and stocking density, and so on. This approach is now required to change on foot of EU regulations. The genesis of the change in this approach lies in discussions at EU level, whereby concerns are raised by the European Court of Auditors as to the inconsistent approach being taken across member states in relation to the designation of land using the socio-economic indicators. So, from 2019, the eligible areas must instead be designated using the following list of biophysical criteria. They are low temperature, dryness, excess soil moisture, limited soil drainage, unfavourable texture and stoniness, shallow rooting depth, poor chemical properties and steep slope. So all EU member states who wish to implement the ANC scheme in 2019 must now use this new approach to identify lands, or else take the other option of continuing the old approach but with sharp cuts to payments for all beneficiaries. The approach of continuing the current system with the sharp cuts across the scheme is not a viable one for Ireland, given the importance of the scheme. So then, how are the eligible areas for 2019 identified? The process of identifying the eligible areas has been carried out at townland level. Essentially, where a townland displays one or more of the biophysical criteria listed above at the level of above 60% threshold set out in the regulation, it's identified as being constrained. In parallel to the biophysical approach, two other processes are set out in the EU regulations have been used to refine the identification of the eligible land. Firstly, a number of areas were identified as having overcome the constraint by reference to high levels of stocking density and arable land cover, and thus not eligible for the 2019 ANC scheme. This is referred to as fine-tuning, so you're fine-tuning outland in the regulations, and this was a mandatory step for all member states. Secondly, areas were identified as eligible for the 2019 scheme as they're facing other specific constraints. In Ireland's case, this process identified townlands as eligible areas of specific environmental importance, townlands facing structural issues relating to farm size, field size, farm fragmentation, and the level of permanent grassland cover. So taken together, these steps have identified the lands deemed to be now eligible under the scheme. So what are the impact of these changes? This has been a lengthy project involving protracted technical engagement with the EU Commission. The outcome of this process can be summarised then as follows. For the vast majority of farmers who were eligible under the scheme until now, they remain eligible from 2019. 98% of the townlands which were eligible to date remain eligible. Some 700 townlands that would have previously been eligible will not now be eligible under the new designation. There are 760 farmers impacted financially by this change, but they will receive a digressive phasing out payment in 2019 of 80% and 2020 20% payment. In the majority of cases, the financial impact of this change is relatively small. Some 2,200 new townlands, 4,000 farmers, will now become eligible under the new approach, and these townlands will be eligible to receive a payment for the first time in 2019. Then, given the importance of this scheme to a large number of farmers, the Department is conscious of the need to ensure that the farmers are made aware of the changes. In addition to putting in place a series of meetings with stakeholders, the Department's website has published a list of eligible townlands by county, where farmers can check the status of the townland in which they hold land. A map representing this is also available to view online, and dedicated email and phone query support is in place. I think we may have circulated a map, Chairman, to members, so the copy of the map which is on the website. In addition, we're in the process of writing to farmers in relation to the process. For the vast majority of farmers, the letter will simply inform them that there's been no change in the status of any land that they hold. No further action is required of them at this stage. For farmers who hold land in townlands that will no longer be eligible in 2019, this letter will also set out some details of the appeals process that's been put in place. It's important that farmers can avail of such an appeals process, and arrangements are now being finalised to put in place an independently chaired appeals committee, which will also have appropriate technical expertise. It's important also for farmers to be aware that if they're in the process of appealing in relation to a particular townland, they can still apply for the scheme under the 2019 BPS and ANC application period opens next February. In Budget 2019, an additional €23 million was allocated to the ANC scheme. This means that the total allocation for the scheme has increased by some €50 million to €250 million over the last two budgets. Following on from the redesignation project, a proportion of the additional €23 million allocated in Budget 2019 will be spent on payments to farmers who will now be eligible for the first time under the scheme in 2019, and existing beneficiaries who are gaining new eligible land under the redesignation. The remaining allocation is expected to be allocated via increased payment rates across the land categories in the scheme. The Department has also held a series of meetings with farm bodies to update them on the current position with regard to the redesignation process and to seek their views on the shape of the scheme for 2019. It's not intended to change the existing eligibility requirements in the scheme, in particular the stocking rate requirement. However, views have been sought in relation to the level of categorisation of land within the scheme and the most targeted way of allocating the additional funds in 2019. And without preempting the outcome of these discussions, the Department would be in favour of continuing the current policy direction of targeting the highest level of funding at those areas experiencing the highest level of constraint or disadvantage. The feedback so far from the discussions is that the farmer organisations are broadly in favour of keeping the structure of the scheme similar to the 2018 scheme. So the next step then, the ANC scheme is a key part of Ireland's €4 billion rural development programme, which is co-funded by the EU. Given the changes required to the scheme for 2019, the RDP has to be formally amended, and the discussions with the EU Commission have commenced in this regard, with a view to providing clarity to farmers in advance of the application period, which starts in February 19. And in conclusion, Chairman, I'd like to thank the members of the committee again for taking the time to discuss the changes to the 2019 ANC scheme. As we've set out, the new designation, along with the increased financial allocation for the scheme, will both be implemented in 2019. And it's vital that the stakeholders and farmers are aware of these developments, and the Department continues to work towards ensuring that the ANC scheme can continue in its important role over the coming years. Colleagues and I are happy to discuss further with the committee, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lynn, very much. First questioner is Deputy Cahill.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to the Department for the presentation and to Mr. Dillon. First of all, I have to express disappointment with our ability to get information on the changes. I tried everywhere over the weekend to get a list of the townslands that have been added, and for that matter, the townslands that have been taken out. I can get a list of all the eligible townlands in the country, but like in my county, there is changes, and unless you knew exactly who was in the last time, you don't know who has been added on this time. Now, in my own locality, I can identify townslands that have been added. But I think what I'd like today for guarantees that before the day is out, that we get a list of the townlands that have been put in extra, just a separate list, and also a list of the townlands that were excluded. Now, I'm not going to argue with your figures. I presume the townlands, like 700 townlands taken out and only affecting 760 farmers. I find that two figures hard to tally, but look, if that's what you say, I accept it. But definitely in my neck of the woods, townlands would be of greater scale than that. and the same with the 2,200 and 4,000 farmers getting in. But I would have to say there hasn't been the kind of extensive changes that we feared might have happened at the start. And definitely in my part of Tipperary, there was areas that were discriminated against the last time on the basis of the income level in the area, and principally because there was a significant amount of dairy farmers in the area, and even though the land quality was definitely on the marshy side, they were excluded on the income criteria. And that has been excluded this time has obviously benefited that area, and in my view they've got their just reward. But I would like to see the list the way we can, that it's a lot easier for us to communicate with people and to say, you're in or you're out. So I would like the department to give us that list without delay. The other question I'd like to ask is, the percentage of the country now that's in must be, in the middle to high 70s. I presume it is, must be hitting around the 3/4, 75%. I would say of the country is receiving some disadvantaged area payment at this stage. How much hectares do we lose because of the ceiling that's attributed to each farmer? And exactly how many hectares are paid for? And I suppose what percentage is lost because of the ceiling? And I know that ceiling was reduced in the past, but could I just have how many hectares of the country that are eligible for payment but don't qualify because of the ceiling that's applied? And those, I suppose, Chairman, they're the questions. And in fairness to the department, they won't be accused of always criticising. I think there's been a good job of work done on this. And as I said, there was a lot of trepidation when a review of this was announced, whenever it was 2 or 3 years ago. And the changes are, fairly minimal, and we're definitely gaining more than we're losing, which wouldn't have been, definitely, it was an outcome we'd have accepted when this review was first mooted. So, but I would like those, that detailed information to be supplied, please, Chairman.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive report. I suppose really the issue I want to get to is the issue of the categorisation of land within the scheme and where that will be, because most of the farmers certainly in the west or the northwest would either have fallen under what we would call the mountain type land, or the more severely, and the fairly badly severely handicapped as well. The less severely areas, I suppose, will be more in the Midlands and in the south. And I'm just wondering, will it follow the same lines, or is there going to be much change, or do you expect to see much change within that? Also, in regard to the rates of payments, the rates of payments is something that we'd like to get a fair sense of. Will it stay similar, or will it be, as is suggested in your document, that areas experiencing the highest level of constraint or disadvantage would be prioritised? Is it going in that direction? Is that the way it's flowing? We're very conscious, particularly in regard to the climate change impact of this, that low intensity grazing upland type land, which deep farmers get it very hard to survive on, are providing a very solid public good by the way they farm. And the ANC payments is vital to keeping those people farming and keeping them out there doing what they're doing. Also, in regard to the exact town lands that have been left out and taken in, I think it would be useful to get some sense of where they are and to actually pin that down. The issue in respect of where this is going to go, I know there was additional money put in for it, and it's probably something we'd have to ask the Minister about when he comes. Last year there was an additional 23 million put into the budget. Is it expected, or in the context of this, and the context of if you like, a new emphasis on areas of natural constraint, would it be expected that we would see more funds go into the pot to try and ensure that this is a scheme that continues to deliver the public good that's set out to deliver? Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Deputy Penrose. Next, please.
Thank Paul and his colleagues there, and I think we shouldn't be churlish. We should congratulate the department and their officials for a job very well done. As I recall here, when this came about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, there was speculation that the whole roof was going to fall in. There was all sorts of things. There was people going out in the media and speculating on ill-founded speculation and causing worry to existing farmers who were in and to potential farmers who might try to get in. This has turned out to be a good news story. Let's cut out this old nonsense of always being down the thing. This is a good news story, and let's acknowledge it, because at the end of the day, this new regulation, the EU regulation, has actually given us an opportunity to examine factors, biophysical factors, and criteria that wasn't available in the previous scheme. And so it allows. And the first thing, of course, being very parochial, is I want to see. Paul, I want to find out what parts of Westmeath I see loads of that's a little bits of green there. I'm glad to see some of the parts, because the areas of Westmeath were excluded, and Longford, of course, in particular. Now there's little bits of pink, but I mean, there's criteria. We can't. They're objective criteria now. We've evaluated very clearly, and if some area is excluded, I can't be whinging about that because of the thing. So I think that's so. And as regard any scheme dealing with areas of natural constraints, it should be focused upon ensuring that the maximum compensation is clearly paid to those with the most or highest level of constraints. And I agree with Deputy Kenny that as evaluated, and evaluated on objective criteria, not some political thing. Let's get the objective criteria, and that has been greatly facilitated by the biophysical factors or criteria that are set out there, and it evaluated at townland level. And I always thought that was a good idea. Now, some people thought it wasn't, but I'm glad that. And the analysis of the biophysical criteria can be used to, exceed the 60% threshold and then qualify thereafter. So I want to. Is it about 100,000 farmers will qualify? Is it or thereabouts for ANC payments? It's 150 million, I think, is the pot. Is it going forward? How much additional money will be required to deal with the increased number of areas or townlands designated, or more? If there's 700 townlands taken out and there's 3,000 additional, or 3,300 is it coming in, or 4,000 coming in, that's a net additional 3,300 townlands or farmers, and 1,500 new townlands. So that will be they'll now be all come eligible for payments from 2019 onwards. What am I right? Will they be about? They'll consume about 11 or 12 million of the additional 23 million. Am I right? Roughly that, and that means there's another 11 million or thereabouts, 11 to 12, depending on how it works out, available for the existing farmers. So there's going to be that amount maybe available to increase, to bias a payment for those who are most constrained, which is the objective of this. So so those are the factors that I think need to be taken into account in that regard. I'm glad to see that. How soon will the next stage of the implementation process of the ANC review be carried out, because you have to get down to, I suppose, refining it and notifying people who are not included. And the appeals process, I'm interested in that, of course, always the appeals process. Independent chairpersons, is it going to be just one independent chairperson, or is there going to be somebody with scientific knowledge of dealing with those biophysical criteria? You can't be putting somebody in who hasn't a clue. I want to make sure that there's people who have knowledge of the various criteria. And I was interested in that when you did the biophysical criteria and the additional factors which dealt and permitted the refinement of the eligible land. And of course, the stocking rate levels, the higher they were, and the more arable they were, and land cover didn't cover one of the issues there. They were going to be excluded. Those are the dominant parameters, I suppose. They were part of the exclusion, but you balance that with the specific constraints, especially with fragmentation, which is fairly predominant down in the west of Ireland. That would be a very important issue. And I think that's the level of grassland cover there would be, that will dealing with rock outcrop and all like that. That would be a very important factor there. But 98% of the existing farmers are going to be, townslands are going to remain eligible, and that's a very specific figure in that regard. So, I mean, it's a goodish news story in comparison to where we started off. And like Deputy Cahill, I was rooting around trying to find out what parts of Westmeath and Longford were in, but I'm not very good with maps anyhow, so but I'll take your word on it that when you'll give me a rough idea of where they're in. But well done to you all in this regard.
Thanks, Deputy. I think we'll take every question. Is that all right? Are you happy enough with that? Okay. Next is Senator Conway Walsh, please.
So my questions are predicated on what the answers might be to some of the questions that I've already put, but I want to ask you, is the mountain grazing area retained? That's one question. And have the two lowland types, the more severely impacted and the less severely impacted, been retained? And I just want to ask you around the amount of flexibility you had. I know you cite in terms of what you're directed to do by the EU, but maybe just what are your areas of flexibility there? Just in terms of the extra 50 million, if you're saying that there's an extra 4,000 being bought into the ANC, is that divided amongst them then? I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, obviously this scheme is designed to compensate for areas that are most severely impacted, and what I want to ask you is how is that being done? So where the highest constraints are, the most severe constraints, how have you balanced it so that the payments will be made to those areas?
Okay. Deputy Fitzmaurice, please.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. On the face of it, it looks pretty good. I'm for just one question, Paul. I'm no more than the other deputies. Where can we get the information to see? I don't know, the Drone Shannon Bridge or Aircourt or on that country in Galway. There's a small bit there. Where can we get the information? Re the townlands that's coming out. Second of all, what was the criteria that you used sort of to put areas in that maybe, I see a few bits down south there that I would have imagined was fairly goodish ground. And thirdly, what's the rates that it will now be, and what's the limits? Is there, with the extra, I think it's 23 million this year and there was 25 million before, and maybe 50 million altogether, over, say, to be over a 3 or 4 year period. What's the rates going to be on the different sections and the maximum amount that can be drawn down? Is that increasing like it was in 2008 or before the crash came? And you talk about the appeal system. Could you explain where is the appeal system, say for the ones that will be appealing, where is that to, or who's handling that appeal? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Deputy. And Deputy Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the Department, for their statements here. Obviously, the ANC payment is a hugely important part of farming income, and I think, you know, in the overall, it appears a good job is done. But I have to, I suppose, focus on my own county of Wexford, which does seem to be one of the hardest hit areas. So it does, and for those particular farmers down in that area who are recovering from several fodder crises, including storms, including snow, and now from a drought, many of them are only beginning to get themselves right again. Can you tell me how many townslands in Wexford are being taken out? How many farmers in Wexford that's going to affect? When will these farmers be notified that they're being taken out? Do you know the loss of value in terms of income to the county of Wexford? And the 60, just to clarify, the 60% threshold for townslands that takes a townsland out, was that decided by the Court of Auditors, or was that set locally here in Dublin?
Okay. And just before I go back to Mr. Dillon's question, with regard the appeals process, maybe if you could tease out a bit more about the appeals process, when it might start, and those, is it just specifically for those who lost out on this occasion, who have been excluded, or is it that there will be a group of farmers who would have had the expectation of being included in this occasion, who felt disappointed not being included maybe in the past? Are they eligible to qualify for the appeals process? And how is that the process? How do you instigate the process? And again, the timescale that's involved. So Mr. Dillon and your colleagues, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I might ask my colleagues to answer some of the questions as we're going along, but start with Deputy Cahill's first question. Can we get the list of the townlands that are in and that are out? We'll arrange that. We can give them to you on a county basis. We'll pull them out on a county basis and we'll give them to you
You're right, too, tonight. Your barely is all of interest in it.
We're writing to all the farmers affected. So, as we said, an awful lot of the farmers won't have any adverse impact, so they'll get a letter saying no change. But the tricky thing for us is we also have a lot of farmers who have some townlands coming out, some townlands staying the same, and some townlands coming in for the first time. So we have to basically make absolutely sure that those letters are right, and that's what we're working on at the minute. So that's our immediate priority, is to get that official notification out to them of the impact it's going to have.
You can still give us the list, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. We get to the list on a county basis of the number of townlands that are in and the number of townlands that are out. On a related question, I might ask Thomas if he wants to talk about the percentages and so on in terms of national level.
Yeah, just pick up on a couple of things there. So your first query regarding the fact that there's only 700 odd farmers or 760 impacted across 700 townlands. Financially impacted, I suppose what we're saying. So because the current scheme design, as you know, and I've referenced already, farmers get paid up to a maximum. So if you have 100 hectares of land, the scheme maxes out at 30. So for some of these farmers, while there is a loss in terms of what was designated land, it hasn't a financial loss on the farmer. And similarly, people may have had tillage crops in the past, and hence the loss of the land isn't a financial loss. So there's over 2,000 farmers farming those townlands, but approximately the 760 where it actually has a financial impact on the farm. So that's just to explain. And similarly, in the positive coming in as well, with regard to the 2,000, we estimate there's over 4,000, but again, history has shown us with the scheme that not all farmers apply for the scheme. So it's approximately 4,000, but we're surprised every year certain farmers perhaps don't fulfil the stocking obligations or just don't apply for whatever personal reason. So there is an element of estimation on what people will do next year. In terms of there was two particular questions you asked there about the percent. One would have to come back to Deputy on, which I think you're asking about how many hectares are in effect not paid on due to the ceiling issue. So I think you're asking, again, how many hectares while eligible due to the scheme limits. Some of that, though, is dependent on what will be the new scheme limits, as in whether we carry over the 30 or the 34 hectare limits. And I think, as Paul has already alluded to, we've been talking to the farm bodies about that. I think broadly everyone's acceptance that there would be a cap of some sort or a limit. So some of those figures will depend on.
Well, I'd be happy I could get the 2018 figures.
Okay, so look at the 2018 ones through.
Well, it's national committees that are right.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah. The other question you'd asked then was with regards to, I think, the percent now constrained. So what we have roughly now, there's 3.5 million hectares in 2018 constrained. We're looking at somewhere around just over 3.7 million hectares will be constrained. There's a net gain between the 2018 and 2019 scheme. The total UAA in the country, I don't have exactly at the moment for me, so I can send you back an explicit figure, but we're looking at over 100,000 hectares of an increase, and we're over 3.7 million hectares now potentially eligible for payment in the scheme. So I'll give you the percent just to be sure, but they're the figures. Okay.
Okay. Deputy Kenny asked us about the categorisation of the land, and will it follow the same lines roughly as it had before? Broadly speaking, that's the thrust of the consultation we've had with the farm body so far, and that's our thinking broadly speaking as well, that we would stay with pretty much the same delineation. So what was regarded as mountain or mountain type grazing before would still be mountain or mountain type. The more severely handicapped would pretty much still be the same kind of areas, and then less severely handicapped would be pretty much the same areas, but broadly speaking. So that's the way we're thinking anyway. In terms of the actual rates we pay, as I said, we have had a round of consultations with the farm bodies. The issue then is, how much money have we available to spend? How much money is taken up by the new entrants, so to speak, the people coming in? The figure for them, the new people coming in for the first time, is probably over the order of about 10 million. They're about 10 and so 10 or 11 that's left to actually spend after we accommodate the people who are coming in for the first time. So that then allows us headroom to give increases across all the existing people who are in there already. And that's what the discussion is with the farm bodies at the minute, what way they would see the greatest increases going.
You expect the new ones going in will be all in the less severely handicapped area?
That's right, yeah. Logic would say that they would, yeah, absolutely. And if you think about when we had an extra 25 million to distribute last year for 2018, the way in which that was approached by the Minister and ourselves was, the greatest level of increase in terms of percentages and in terms of the volume of money went to the people in the mountain type category. and so on down along through the categories. So our thinking would be, and the farm bodies seem to indicate that that's the way they see it as well for now, that we would apply the same logic. Whatever money is available to be redistributed to people who are there and were there beforehand, that we would distribute it in that fashion as well.
So there won't be much movement, for instance, from people who would be on more severely handicapped area the last time that would come into less severely handicapped. You don't see much movement around that?
No, we don't. We don't. No.
Okay.
No, that's the thinking at the minute anyway, and that's the feedback we're getting from the farm bodies as well in terms of how we actually redistribute the available money that's left.
Is there a map available showing the different categories?
Yeah, we can get you the map.
Yeah, I think that would be useful to see.
Yeah. We get
again, send it to the committee. And,
yeah, we can.
Yeah,
absolutely.
please.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
We'll all come to you and we'll come through. We'll look after you.
Okay.
Always do, Mike.
Okay, Deputy Penrose, thank you for the comments about the way in which it's gone so far. As I said, we will supply the details of at the county level of the townlands that are in and the townlands that are out. And as I said, we know how many farmers are coming in for the first time. We treat them as if they are coming into the less severely handicapped. Then we know roughly how much money that's going to take, and then that'll tell us how much money we have available. The appeals process, it'll be an independent chair. It will also be supported by independent technical advice, and we'll have admin support for it as well. So that's in the process being set up at the minute. It has to be somebody who's broadly acceptable to all the stakeholders, and that's what we're doing at the minute.
Somebody who knows something.
Sorry?
Somebody who knows something about soils.
Yes, absolutely. The technical expert will have to be somebody who knows something about soils, because what they'll be doing is they'll be reviewing the interpretation that was taken by... Yeah, so they're going through that process, so they have to know what that process is.
Site visits?
There can be, but that's entirely up to the committee.
Okay.
So, come back to your question, Chair, if I may take them out of order.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
We will be setting up the committee straight away, and the Minister will make an announcement about that. We will be writing to the farmers who are being adversely affected, so they will be told of the right of appeal, and they will simply have to say to us, write back and say you want to appeal. That's all they have to do at the outset. Then we will be able to tell them the reason for them either being dropped out of the scheme altogether or for not getting in. In other words, which of the biophysical criteria they failed, or which of the fine-tuning parts that they failed, and so on. So that will then allow them to focus their appeal. There's no point in making it any longer than that. That's why there's a two-step process here. So that's the way we'll do it. That won't take too long. In terms of the timeline then for actually getting through it, the 2019 scheme will open in February in tandem with the BPS scheme for 2019. The closing date is the 15th of May. Anybody who's in doubt should apply anyway for both, just by ticking the box on the BPS form, same as they would have done before. The critical time for us then is to have all those appeals decided upon in time for payments, which is kind of autumn of 2019. So that's the available window, if you like, for all that work to be done and dusted. So
Is there any, just one question about it.
Is there any criteria in it, say, for, I'd be looking at some areas there that may be small farms. Is there anything to help those small farms if they were caught in that area that was coming out? Say a small farmer that might have 20, 30 acres, that the likes of the ANC was fierce important to them. Is there anything there among the a la carte of stuff that you look at? Is there any...
So within what's called specific constraints, so where the process that led us to the current map had included what's known as specific constraint, and one of those had small farm size, so I think it's less than 80% of the national average. So it's already built into what we've achieved in terms of this final process, as in farmers, smaller holdings, fragmented holdings, which in themselves, respective to the land quality, can have an impact on the viability. So it's already in there. That data. But again, I suppose the appeals process, we would be able to tell people why they haven't got in. They can look at that and see if there is a particular issue they want to bring to us or the committee.
A brief comment.
Yeah, it's just brief in relation to the islands and the status of the islands. Is first, has that been sorted? And I just ask you in relation to, say, one of the islands even near myself, it's within a mile of me at home, the Barn Island, and they have waited for the last 3 years, the landowners on there, to establish whether they meet the criteria or not. And is there somebody specifically within the department who will deal with the island status?
take that. The island scheme will remain unchanged. As an entity, it remains unchanged, separate from the discussions ongoing today. It remains as an area of specific constraint. I'm not exactly sure of the geographic location in relation to that island, but the basic criteria for an island to be eligible for the scheme is an offshore island with no permanent land bridge to the island. So we have the equivalent of Valentia and Achill wouldn't qualify because they have a permanent land bridge, whereas the other offshore islands. The only islands which are sort of more inland are within the Shannon Estuary. So that would be it. But I can take on board if you want to. I am the person responsible. So if you wish to contact myself, I can look into that case specifically for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll just carry on with a few more questions, I think. Okay, go ahead. We'll come back then. If there's more questions, we'll come back afterwards.
Okay. See, we covered the information on the townlands, and we covered the criteria used. I think Thomas dealt with that. We covered the extra money and how it's proposed to distribute the extra money. I think that was covered already.
Deputy Brown's regards the Townsland in Wexford, number of farmers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms, I think the first one, the number of townlands, as we've already committed to, we'll provide the list, so we'll be able to see the change. Also, we've mentioned that we are writing to all farmers that are coming out or in fact getting new land or staying the same. So those letters are issuing at the moment. It'll take a while to get the full over 100,000 letters out. I think your last question was on that threshold, that biophysical 60%. That's within the regulations. So there's 60% of what they call the utilisable agricultural area, or the agricultural area in the townland, had to be constrained for it to be deemed biophysically constrained. So it's within the regulations, and you know that is that obviously does imply that there are areas that would have some constraint but don't hit the 60 and hence don't get in.
Sorry, just to cover, that 60% was decided with the Court of Auditors, with all the others?
Well, it would have, the Court of Auditor view of the last scheme would have fed into the discussions throughout Europe about the need to move to biophysical, and then that percentage was put in as part of the 2013 discussions on the regulation. So the courts would have said it needs to move to biophysical, and then the exact biophysical and the exact thresholds were part of the negotiation, the reformed of the cap the last time. So it's in the regulations now, 60%.
But was it put in as a recommendation from Dublin or from your?
It was negotiated at the time the regulations were being written. I honestly I'm not aware that it was something the court explicitly said 60, to be honest straight with you, but it's in the regulations, so it's not within our remit. It went into the regulations, we had to apply it.
Okay. I think we've addressed most of the questions.
I think we have. If we don't, we'll be happy to go back over them. I'm not sure.
Anything else before we? Any other questions, members? And before we?
I'm just doing the maths there. 25 million, I think, was something like 260 or 70 euro to everyone in the last batch. And when you bring the new people in, how would it be? About 100 euro, going by what I'm looking at, is the increase across the board. Would that be fair to say?
If we were to give the same amount to everybody.
Yeah, does that look like?
When we had the extra money for 2018, it was agreed that the way it should be done was the people with the worst land should get the biggest increase. Yeah, so we probably applied the same logic again this time.
Deputy Kenny, yeah.
The way it's set out, clearly, we have more green areas in than we have a lot of pink areas out. And I assume that those areas are areas that met one of the constraint, what do we call them, the menu that was there of the various things that categorise physical constraints. Is there a formula in which you decide where they are severely disadvantaged or less severely? Do they have to have 2 or 3, or is there some formula you come in with there, or is it just a kind of an ad hoc based on what was before? You know, I'd like to get clarity on that. Also, in regard to Deputy Fitzmaurice's question in regard to the money and how it's divided out, I think before it might have been exactly, but it was close enough to a 3-2-1 sort of a formula that, you know, it was divided up in that kind of way. If that were to be done again, it would make a big difference, because I'm very conscious of particularly farmers in the west and the northwest with the very heavies. Like they probably take all of the boxes, never mind one of them or 2 of them. And I'm very conscious that the need to try and make sure that while farmers everywhere need support and need to be helped, and need to get every assistance possible to ensure that they are productive and that they have sustainable farms. This is a scheme which is about the constraint of the land, and therefore should be paid on that. And I think that we shouldn't lose that focus in respect of it. That it's about the constraint, and from that point of view, I'd like to get a reassurance that that there is a clear commitment to pay it on that basis.
Take that first of all, then we'll go back to Deputy Cahill.
So just to address the first question with regard to the biophysical, just explain how it worked. So to be deemed biophysically constrained, you had to have at least one of the criteria that's listed there, at least 60% of the townland. So, for example, some townlands simply had one, over 60% applying, whereas you've rightly pointed out others had all of them. But within the regulations it was at least 60% of the utilisable agricultural area had to be constrained. There was then, as we set out in the statement there, the need to fine-tune, as in effect, look at, in our case, use stocking rate and arable, and in effect so that people had managed or had learned to live with or function with the constraint, and hence they became fine-tuned out. So in terms of, let's call it the pink areas you're looking at, some would not have hit the biophysical, so they might have got over the 60, others may have hit it, but then with regard to fine-tuning may have come back out. And then there's specific constraints as well going on. So different pink areas, using the colouring in the map there, are not in the new scheme due to different reasons. Some just didn't hit the biophysical, others did, but were in effect fine-tuned out due to the level of stock and the level of arable. I think in broad terms, the second one, we have had discussions with all the farm bodies. All the discussions are sort of broadly in agreement that the money would, I think if you suggested, move towards the areas of most constraint. So with regard to both the last and the percent increase and the amount increase was larger in the mountain areas. So I think we would see that same direction happening for the reallocation or the allocation of monies to these areas in the new scheme.
Just the time frame for appeals. When do you envisage? Because I suppose to have them done by the 1st of May would be important. Is that envisaged to be practical?
Chairman, it all depends with the appeals, how many we actually get. So we will set up the process straight away. As I said, we will be writing to all the affected farmers, so they will be able to appeal straight away. As soon as they get their letter, they'll be able to lodge their appeal. We'll make every effort to get them done in time for the closing date of the 15th of May. And as I said, even if they're not fully concluded at that stage, our advice to the farmers would be, apply for the ANC scheme anyway, and we will have the work done then when it comes to payment time, so they won't lose out. It's easier than do it the other way around and not apply, because that creates problems with the EU then, because the farmer hasn't actually committed to abiding with the terms and conditions of the scheme. Chairman, I might mention one other thing as well that we didn't mention already, and that is that the new regulation requires us to have an element of what they call degressivity in the payment, and what we call front loading. So we have to pay a higher rate for the first so many hectares than we do in each of the tiers. So you will see we haven't actually settled on what the first more hectares is. But say, for example, if it was 10, you pay more for the first 10 hectares for a farmer than you do for the rest. And we have to have that within each of the 3 categories. Okay. We're required to do that. That wasn't there for all the categories before.
Deputy
Just one final question. Even those who lose out, they're going to get a couple of years payment, isn't it?
2 years.
So it's 80%, 20%?
Yes.
Over 2 years?
Yes.
So even they'll go in 2019, 2020, we're still getting a couple of shillings.
That's in the regulation, yeah.
So
okay, any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Thanks, Mr. Dillon and your colleagues for coming before us today, and you'll supply us with the information that you have in due course. I appreciate that very much. Thanks for coming before me today. That's no further business. This matter, I propose we suspend until we get the other officials in now before us. Thank you. Okay, this part of the meeting is going to be the consideration of the motion read a horse and greyhound racing fund regulation 2018. I'd like to welcome Minister Michael Creed, TD, Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, is officials here today. The purpose of the meeting is the motion before us today is referred to by the Dáil and Senate on 22nd November 2018 for consideration, imposing a deadline date for which the committee must report back by the 29th of November. Just to remind members, remind members of long-standing parliamentary practice the fact that members should not comment on, criticise or make a charge against either a person outside the House and officially by name, or just ways to make him or her identifiable. Call on the Minister now to make his opening statement, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The horse and greyhound racing industries occupy a special place in the Irish psyche and a key position in the rich tapestry of Irish sport. They are valuable to our economy, central to our identity and cornerstones of our social and cultural heritage. An important pillar of government policy is to ensure that the horse and greyhound racing industries achieve their maximum potential and in so doing contribute to economic and social development across a wide geographic swathe of the country. Time and again through the years, governments have acknowledged the importance of these industries and have supported them through legislation and policy initiatives. The support provided by public funds through investment in these industries has enabled Ireland to develop into a world centre of excellence for horse racing, greyhound racing and breeding. The Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been front and centre in providing this investment and has played a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of these industries. These industries receive financial support from the state through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund under Section 12 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act of 2001. My department makes payments from the fund to Horse Racing Ireland and Bord na Gan. In the period 2001 to date, a total of €1.2 billion has been paid from the fund to the horse and greyhound racing industries, and in accordance with the provisions of the Act. The cumulative upper limit on payments from the fund provided for under the relevant legislation has been reached. Exchequer funding provided from the fund is crucial to the survival and continued development of the horse and greyhound racing industries. In order to give effect to the provisions of Budget 2019, this cumulative upper limit must be increased by regulation. The estimates for my department, passed by both houses as part of Budget 2019, include an allocation of €84 million for the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund. This will be distributed in accordance with Section 12, subsection 6 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act 2001, with 80% going to HRI, or €67.2 million, and 20% going to Bord na Gan, or €16.8 million. In order to allow my department to provide the monies allocated in Budget 2019, it is necessary to comply with the technical requirement under Section 12, subsection 13 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act to increase the cumulative limit on the amount payable from the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund by €84 million to some €1.28 billion. This is achieved by way of the regulations submitted to this committee today. The aggregate limit on the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been increased in this manner in 2004 and in 2009 to 2017 inclusive. The 2017 Deloitte report into the economic impact of Irish breeding and racing, commissioned by Horse Racing Ireland, indicates that the total direct and stimulated expenditure of the Irish breeding and racing industry is estimated at €1.84 billion in 2016. In addition, it is estimated that there are 15,200 jobs at the core of the racing and breeding industry or in directly related industries. Horse racing generates a very significant return to the rural economy in Ireland and a positive international profile for our country. Of course, behind all the facts and figures are the thousands of men and women who, directly and indirectly, make the Irish racing and breeding industry what it is today. As proven in 2018, Irish owners, trainers, jockeys and horses are setting standards globally, and their stellar achievements and enduring influence underscore Ireland's international prominence. The Irish equine breeding and racing industry is extremely competitive at a global level, despite other major racing nations having much larger populations and economies. Despite our size, we are the third biggest producer of thoroughbred foals in the world, and estimates place Ireland only behind the United States as the biggest seller of bloodstock by public auction globally. However, the significant threat posed by Brexit to the current ease of movement of horses between Britain and France, in addition to the global nature of major breeding operations, illustrate that while Ireland arguably now has a leadership position within Europe, its preeminence is not guaranteed. It is worth noting that government funding, in addition to supporting this key industry, also presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment, leading to a flow of income right through the economy. Support for certain strategic industries is important for future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits for our society as well as for our economy. According to the 2017 Power Report, the greyhound industry provides and supports considerable employment both directly and indirectly across the Irish economy. It is estimated that in 2016 the industry supported 5,058 full-time and part-time jobs in the economy. In addition, there are 7,313 active greyhound owners. The total number of people deriving economic benefit from the sector is estimated at 12,371. It is an industry that is deeply ingrained in the social and cultural networks of rural Ireland. The future of the industry is dependent on a strong governance platform and on the industry having the highest standards of integrity and welfare founded on a strong regulatory system. I am very pleased that the Greyhound Racing Bill is progressing well through the Shannon under the stewardship of my colleague Minister Doyle, and I look forward to its smooth progression through the Dáil. In addition to its focus on the core business of greyhound racing, Bord na Gan places a strong emphasis on regulation of the industry and the welfare of greyhounds. It is evident that the successful growth and sustainability of the industry is heavily dependent on public confidence in the integrity of racing. To this end, I welcome the fact that Bord na Gan continues to invest significant resources into regulation and greyhound welfare. The advent of new technologies and business models has challenged government to re-evaluate the funding mechanisms for the industry. As part of its overall commitment to the industry, the government has addressed through legislation the anomaly whereby remote and online betting operators were outside the tax net. The measures introduced in the Betting Amendment Act 2015 had a positive effect on revenue streams, with significant increases being realised. It is worth noting that betting taxes increased from a total of 31 million for 2015 to 52.2 million in 2017. I welcome Minister Donoghue's announcement in his budget speech for 2019, whereby betting taxes being increased from 1% to 2%. It is estimated that this increase will contribute 40 million to the Exchequer in 2019. In conclusion, given the wide geographic distribution of these two industries, they are fundamental to the achievement of a more balanced regional economic growth. Relieving the burden on our major urban centres and nurturing rural economies is a key priority for the government. In this context, these industries should be given recognition for the considerable contribution that they make to rural economic activity and employment. Brexit poses an array of substantial threats to the Irish economy, and coupled with the fact that we are a small and open economy naturally prone to volatility, it is difficult to predict what the future holds. It is therefore more important than ever that we support these important industries to help maintain sustainable growth in these sectors. Both sectors also face a series of challenges in the areas of funding, infrastructure and staffing, but even in the face of all these challenges, the industries are steadfast in their ambition to build on recent progress and success. Accordingly, I am asking you all for your support to ensure that Horse Racing Ireland and Bord na Gan receive the funding provided for in Budget 2019, and that the very important role played by these industries and the economic activity generated by them are sustained into the future. I commend this regulation to the committee, and I look forward to discussing any matters arising. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Cahill is first up.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Minister, for your presentation. As you said at the outset, two very important industries for the economy as a whole, and especially for rural Ireland. There's a number of issues I want to raise, Minister, and the first one is harness racing and the attempts of harness racing to get off the ground in the country. And, I suppose we all as committee members, we've been lobbied by the Harness Racing Association, and they have put forward, my understanding is they have put forward a 5-year strategic plan for their industry, and they've done this in cooperation with the department. And, France are putting their shoulder to the wheel in trying to get this industry going here in this country, and they've committed to investing 245,000 in prize money here in Ireland for 2019, and so far the French have put in 550,000 into harness racing in this country. There was a meeting held in Dundalk last year in which 5 races were run, and on the PMU in France, 850,000 was bet on the PMU on those 5 races. So I think, that shows that the interest in this racing is there, and the potential for the industry to develop and expand is there. And, as you showed there in your presentation, Minister, the tax going from 1 to 2% is going to yield another 40 million for the exchequer. But, this industry, has the potential, if they can get the funding to get up and running, has the potential to I suppose, be self-financing when they get into a position of having more race meetings. Now, obviously, it doesn't compare in size to either horse racing or greyhound racing. At the moment, I reckon there's around 320 or 330 trainers and owners in the business. But I'm sure, with more regular meetings, that number would increase. Now, my understanding is their request is for a once-off 250,000 as seed capital, and that you would want 650,000 then per annum ongoing to fund the industry and get it established. I think, Minister, this proposal from Irish Harness Racing Association demands careful scrutiny, and I think they have shown that they're able to run the industry and run it well. And their pilot race meetings have been successful, and I think with the funding that they're requesting and with their strategic plan in place, I think this this request is I think worthy of serious consideration. Now, the point was made to me that they had this plan in place for September, and that their proposal was there a good few weeks or months before budget day, and that they would feel that to be left another 12 months waiting is going to really put a handbrake on the development of their sport. So I suppose I'm putting to the Minister that I would like your views on immediate funding for this segment of our sport, of our horse sport industry, and will the request get I suppose favourable consideration. Now, the second industry I want to talk about is Horse Sport Ireland, and I suppose we had representatives of Horse Sport Ireland in here last week. And Minister, you were making a presentation there, and you talked about the excellence of our sport and the way our horse racing, and that I suppose. Pardon?
Alliance.
Horse Sport Alliance. Sorry, Chairman. Horse Sport Alliance. There's so many bodies I get mixed up in them anyway. Horse Sport Alliance. But the one point that it took me 3 or 4 times to get the answer out of Horse Sport Alliance here last Tuesday evening was the amount of Irish-bred horses that are jumping internationally now as a percentage of the horses that are competing for Ireland. And the figure that we were given was only 10% of the horses that are jumping competitively for Ireland are Irish-bred. And to me, that sends a warning signal as regards the route that this business is heading. And unless there was a time, if you go back to the Aggie teams of the 70s, all those horses were Irish-bred, and the vast majority were Irish-bred. I suppose to say an exclusive statement like that would be wrong, but the vast majority were Irish-bred. And even you'd see the Army Equestrian Centre. It's a long time now since we've seen a representative of those jumping internationally for us. And to me, of all the presentation they made to us, obviously there were requests and funding for their industry and the development of their industry. But the point that they made that only 10% of those horses, I think that shows that there's something wrong within our horse sport industry. And obviously it hasn't the ability to create finance. Betting definitely isn't widespread in their industry, whether it is eventing or show jumping. They don't attract betting like other industries that involve horses. But I think they made a lot of points here the last day, and I'm not saying everything they said was correct. But to me, I think we have to give serious consideration to where this industry is going when there's only that level of Irish-bred horses jumping competitively for the country. So again, I think they made requests here for funding the last day. Most of them was looking for better infrastructure and better prize money for shows. And I think again, Minister, it's something that we need to sit down and analyse. And I think before it's too late, We need again to start breeding horses here that can jump internationally. And we were renowned for horses we produced in the past, and obviously we have definitely slipped down the scale as regards producing eventers and show jumpers. Just on the you talked here about the Greyhound Bill, and the Greyhound Bill and its progressing, and that's welcome. I suppose one thing that I would like to see happening, Minister, and something I've raised here on a number of occasions, is that we would have one lab for horse racing Ireland and the greyhound industry, and that's something I would like to see progressed. And the integrity of greyhound industry, there has been a lot of sticks and stones thrown at it. Whether they're all merit or not is a different question. But to me, at this juncture, I think to have one lab is common sense. Now, some tells me that there's different requirements as regards testing dogs and testing horses, but surely to have the lab under one roof would be the most economical way to go. And we need a lab that can do the samples that are taken, and that those samples can stand up to any scrutiny in any court. And I think that's something that definitely isn't watertight at the moment. And if someone is found guilty of a prohibited substance, the full rigours of this new act has to be able to be enforced. And I think a properly funded lab governing the two industries, I think, would be a welcome step forward. I'm nearly finished, Chairman. Now I'm being long-winded, but I'm nearly finished. Just the betting tax and the increase in the betting tax, Minister, and I know this will be in the finance bill, but I have serious worries about on-track bookmakers and that they're going to disappear as part of the industry. And they're an integral part of our whole, of the whole, I suppose, social scene at race meetings, be they horse or dogs, and they bring a unique atmosphere to the events. The numbers have dropped hugely in the last couple of years, and the turnover definitely at midweek race meetings is now very low. And I think if the betting that is done on course, and I'm only talking about on course, the betting that's done on course, I think if they were given an exemption from this increase in tax, it would be some incentive for some of those sole traders to stay in business. And I am worried that they are competing with the online business and the computers that we're all working, and there's an awful lot of business done online, and an awful lot of betting is done that. And I'm not talking about that, making that exempt. I think the increase in tax is the way to go there, and I think it's the way to fund the industry going forward. But I think we need some recognition of on-track bookmakers and to try to keep them in business, because the figures will show, I would say, we've only about 30–35% of what we had 10 years ago. And I think if we don't do something to arrest that decline, we are going to lose an integral part of what makes a day at the race or night of the dogs enjoyable. So those are the points, and obviously, we support Fianna Fáil, we support the allocation of exchequer funding to these industries, and we will be supporting it in the chamber. But those I suppose, questions and observations I would like the Minister to answer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Penrose, next, please.
Thanks, Chairperson. Well, the Labour Party, we have always recognised the important role that the horse and greyhound industry has played in relation especially to the rural economies and their backbone there in terms of employment, and important for the preservation of our future, of our ongoing development and culture, and indeed that. But help, I suppose, continue our prominent role in the equestrian and greyhound industries, both at home and abroad, in terms of, and like Deputy Cahill, I mean, Minister, you have a copy of the Irish Harness Racing Association submission, the plan. You wanted a copy of the 5-year plan. I understand that went into you in mid-October. So you have an opportunity to review that. I mean, I think last year we understood that you would give it serious consideration when we raised it at this committee, so I anticipate that you will. But there's only about 750,000 required. And they do need, it's not just seed capital, they do need some, capital funding as well, I mean, to try and, seed funding is all right, But capital funding is absolutely critical in that regard. And the future is that they will be making a contribution. You know, they have set a basis. You know, you're right, you insisted upon them satisfying certain criteria. And they have done that in relation to, you know, protection and integrity of the thing and the structures, and in relation to the welfares and all those issues. And you're right about that, because it's absolutely critical. But I think that it would be important that you would recognise them and give them an opportunity from 2019 to going forward. Again, we had Horse Sport Alliance last week, Minister, and they made a very forceful contribution to our committee in relation to various issues. I don't think we can easily dismiss them, and we should pay attention to the various points that Mr Broderick and other people made to this committee last week. Look, I mean, I've maybe the experience of being long enough here, Minister. I think you might have been here yourself in 2001 when Minister Walsh, I think you were actually, Minister Walsh was brought forward a 2001 Act in this area. And you know, I supported it, but one of the things I remember is that the ceiling that time was 200 million, as far as I remember, it's the fund. And now it's increased to 1.3 billion over a 17-year period. Now, that's a 650% growth in that fund, despite recession in the middle of it. Now, we had a couple of recessions. There was certainly one when there wasn't a recession. It was a blowout. You know, so I mean that's fairly serious, and it's you know, it has been raised, and it's significant funding going direct from the taxpayers to those two industries, and you know, we have to recognise that. And the important thing from that perspective is to get value for money. I think, Minister, you'll be very critical of that. It's important. So the centre question is whether the public is getting value for money from the growing subsidy to both industries. You know. And, as I said, there's doubtless importance in preserving and protecting jobs in these traditional industries and keeping the traditions vibrant and protecting them going forward. But certainly, we're increasing it far in excess of inflation. And what concerns me, you know, is at the end of the day, HRI come in here, and we have certainly put new governance structures and everything in place. What concerns me is that, you know, they've indicated that their objective is to get to the point that they don't have to rely upon you at all, or the Exchequer, for any funding, and that the monies that they get will be like tax revenues raised in various remote and online betting and all like that. And I would like to see that day coming, because, you know, because I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I'm hopeful that will happen, because it's extremely important. To people out there that you know, this is I mean, I don't know, I think in 2016 I remember it was 37 or 38 million went in prize funds. Now, I'm quite happy for prize funds to be going to the ordinary little horse trainers and horse owners and small horse tracks, let it be Kilbeggan, Ballinrobe, Roscommon, any of those places where I do Turles, correct, and Clonmel. All those places, absolutely. And yes. And Gore, well, Gore, not too bad, no, yeah, not too bad. Condies are good sponsors down there. I do it down there, Mr. Chairman. But, you know, all of those small races, they get hard, you know yourself. They're out there surviving. They're looking for sponsorship. They're getting hard to survive. And when you look at it, a lot of the prize money is going, as far as I see, it's going nearly to the one place, or to the 2 or 3 places. The big boys are cleaning up. They've tax-free stallion status, they've everything else, and they're bringing home the bacon every weekend. And that's grand to a point. But soon the little people are washed away. And I don't mind taxpayers' money going in to mind the little people. That's where I don't mind where it's going in, as long as it's going into there. Protect them. Lots of great people down there. Peter Downs of this world, Russ Down Stud, great breeders over the years, give us some great horses. Won major races. But it's a tough job for those people to survive. 3 or 4 mares and stuff like that. It's a very easy job when you're can call 75,000 or 125,000 for a stallion fee. It's not too bad surviving in that game. And then go out to Saturdays or Sundays and clean up as well. And there's a lot of this money going into the prize funds. So I'm in this game, so I have an idea. But I'm in there to represent the small little people. That's where I am. The people who can have accountants and everything else, they're well able to look after themselves, so I have no sympathy with them at all. So I would like to make sure, and I'm looking forward, Chairperson, to Mr Kavanagh appearing here, because this is not Minister Creed's job merely, but still I'd like to send a signal to him. I'd be looking forward to the Chairperson, the Chief Executive of HRI and all like that appearing here, because I have a few points to follow up. For example, I mean, it's a Kilbeggan race course. Senator Daly's chairperson. He's not here today. He's on another mission with another committee. Yeah, they're a long time looking for the few bob chairperson, and conditions are attaching to them that, you know, not attaching to other loan or other grants. So, I want to drill down into this, and I'm quite happy that money be given over, as long as the prize money has to be increased to ensure that the ordinary little racehorse trainer, the ordinary owners, this little syndicate, start keeping the thing going through thick and thin. And, you know, HRI there, I think in 2016 I saw, a group surplus of 4.8 million. And of course you can have that if you're charging an owner for renewing. You have a set of colours in 2017, and you have the same set of colours in 2018, and you have to pay to renew them. That's a nonsense. The GAA club doesn't, if it doesn't change its jerseys, it doesn't have to go into the county board as a former chairperson, you know that, and start paying at January for the renewals. There's too many little obstacles to the small people. And there's always, as a fellow said to me one time, if you owed a bank manager one time years ago £1,000 and you didn't pay it, you'd be come out, someone would be arresting you. If you owed him £100,000, he'd be out scrubbing the up in case you'd fall going in. And that was the way it was. And it's the very same with this. There's an old step and I can't use it because there's a little profanity in it back home from my own place. But there's too much grease going to oil the wheels that the very well-to-do are getting richer out of this game. And the small little people are struggling. So with that reservation, I support what the Minister is doing, but sending a signal that support is no longer free and easy, that it's qualified support on the basis that I want to ensure that the small tracks get a good share of the money, and that the small trainers and the people who have the syndicates, I think that they have an opportunity of securing decent funding through prize money when they have a little horse that might be running.
Thanks, Deputy. Just for the information of members, HRI Chief Executive and Chairman will be before the committee here either the last meeting before Christmas or the first meeting after Christmas.
I'll leave it the first meeting after Christmas. We'll have a lot of thinking.
You'll be ready for him.
I'll have a lot of thinking done by that.
Deputy Kenny, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for your open statement. I was just looking at the final paragraph in the final sentence of the third paragraph, that the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been front and centre, providing this investment and played a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of these industries. And certainly over a period of time, we have, €1.2 billion been spent in these two industries, and it's to be acknowledged. You know, the Irish horse all over the world is renowned, and we have all that culture and identity and all that associated with it. And you know, I was just thinking here as Deputy Penrose was talking about, you know, at the moment we have the Irish sugar beet industry trying to get off the ground, and they'll be looking for help and looking for investment, possibly from the state. And if we were in 10 years' time looking at a statement in front of us that they were after getting €1 billion over a period of time, we'd be saying, what the name of God is wrong that these people can't get an industry going that will at some stage become self-sufficient? And there is, I think, an element of that here. And certainly if you like, two different sets of standards, where we see that, you know, and we've all had representations from the people of the harness racers, and they're trying to get off the ground and trying to get going and looking for small enough amount of money to get a fledgling industry going in a particular sector of this, and finding it very difficult, and finding that they've put in reports, and when they put in a report, they're referred here and referred there and everywhere. But at the end of the day, nobody sits down with them and says, "Okay, here's the solution. We want to work this out with you." And come up with a solution. And you've done your plan, and your plan shows us an element of a serious element of sustainability in it, and where you can go. And yet they're not getting fair wind. That's certainly the experience, and I think it'll be the experience of most members that have spoken to them. That's what we're hearing back. However, the horse racing industry, which is an industry which is really, a multi-million euro industry, is continuing to get a lot of support from the state. And I'm not going to judge the right or wrong of that, but I would judge the ongoing sense of continuing that indefinitely. And surely at some point or other we have to come to a stage where we say, is it like, and we had the department in earlier talking about the areas of natural constraint, but these aren't areas of natural constraint. In general, an awful lot of it is in areas where, and I know from speaking to farmers, certainly I know in County Tipperary there's farmers down there that say they can't buy land, they can't compete with the big stud farms that are coming buying the land from everyone, and no other farmer can compete with them. And and I'm not saying the market isn't wrong. The market does what the market does. But ultimately, at some point or other, as a state, we have to say to ourselves, have we got a plan here for this industry for it to become self-sustainable, or close? Or if it's not become self-sustainable, what areas of it require the investment to make it self-sustainable, or if there's areas of it that will continue, that will need ongoing investment, where are they? And be more specific about it, because I just have a problem, Minister, with writing out a big cheque and handing it to horse racing Ireland and say, away you go lads and spend that how you like. And that's the problem that we all have here. And I think, in general, that there needs to be a wake-up call in regard to that. I know I've spoken to you about this before and I've complained about it, and it's not to beat anyone up. I recognise this industry does employ a lot of people. But I do have a problem, and I think most honest taxpayers out there have a problem, that they see, some of the very well-fed sector getting more, and others getting less. And we need to bring a sense of balance back into it. Also, and I know the Greyhound Bill is progressing, and the greyhound industry is an industry that has certainly had a lot of its critics, and there are a lot of problems there. And we would hope that this new legislation will deal with some of those problems. Personally, I don't think it really matters what legislation you put in place. If people are out to do the wrong thing, they're going to do the wrong thing. And I think that, unfortunately, in elements of that, a culture of that has developed. And how that changes, I don't know, but it will take a very firm hand and a very long rod to get it back into shape. And I certainly hope that it does get back into shape. But, Minister, I would ask you to reflect on that, and where this is going long term, because I don't think, whether it's the people that are here now or others are in this position in 10 years' time, that we should be looking at 2.5 or 3 billion having been spent on these industries over a period of time. That isn't, I just don't think it's sustainable to continue it in this manner. I think there has to be some effort made to take a grip of it and say, OK, there's elements of this industry that need support, let's support those elements, but not just hand out a cheque with a certain amount to an organisation and let them come back and tell us how to spend it. I don't think that's appropriate.
Thanks, Deputy. Thanks, Deputy. Senator Mulhern, next, please.
Thanks. Welcome, Minister and officials. I think it's very clear that there's a serious commitment through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund, the annual fund there, which was approved, of course, most recently, 84 million in the budget, as you've said, to the two sectors, or the sector. And I think when you're putting money in there, you're supporting rural development, you're supporting sustainability. And I suppose, similar to some of the comments that have been made, one would like to see it rolled out more to the likes of Ballinrobe, to the likes of Kilbeggan, because it does make a difference in those communities that they're supported. I'd also like to raise my own concerns, which have been put to me by local independent bookmakers on account of the rise in the betting tax. And the concerns are that they won't be able to continue, and I'm talking about the independent bookmakers, they're on the high street, or the bookmakers that are on the tracks, beside the track. And also the issue, and it would affect I suppose more so the smaller race courses, a threat of less sponsorship from the big bookmakers on account of this betting tax, and this affects their sustainability in terms of getting sponsorship for races. So I think that we need to be careful how we proceed. I suppose I want to welcome the fact that Minister Donoghue has said he's going to review an aspect of this, and I think that's very important. Because the last thing we want to do is drive more business from the high street, from the independent bookmaker, towards online or whatever else. They're well able to look after themselves online, and the big, I suppose, chain stores of bookmakers that exist also. Just another point then, as has been said by previous speakers, we had the Sports Horse Alliance here. They have a report, they have an economic analysis done by Jim Power. And I think, aside from going into the detail of it, based on what has been done with the horse racing industry and the greyhound industry, I think there's great potential in the sports horse sector as well. And again, it's something that can benefit rural Ireland. It needs support and it needs a framework to proceed, to become more professional, so as that we're breeding, we're having the competitions that make us more international, rather than our Olympic athletes, our international medal winners having to always go abroad. You know, an awful lot of the work that's done with sports horses, it seems to me, when I look around where I'm from, seems to be a labour of love, but there's obviously a local economy benefit in it, and some of this has been measured in the report, and I suppose it's open for discussion. The report is a starting point. I know that you increased the budget by 600,000 this year to Sports Horse Ireland, bringing it to 3 million. It obviously pales into, it's not insignificant, it's taxpayers' money, but it's nothing like what we're giving to the horse racing and the greyhound racing. And I suppose, I'm not suggesting we throw money at anything, but I'm just wondering, how are we going to go forward with this to realise the ambitions of people involved in the sports horse sector who are now coming together under this alliance? Like, how can they proceed from here to present something to you that you're willing to fund? Investment in venues, and other issues they raised was basically the passing on of, you know, whether it's apprenticeships or the knowledge seems to be gained or gleaned by people in the sector in a very ad hoc way, and how there can be more educational interventions there, and how we can become more professional and reap the benefits from that professionalism and see benefits in the areas that many of us represent, being the rural areas. So I just ask, Minister, for where you see this going, what we can do, what direction you can give to them here today, because I'm sure they're watching, you know, as to how we're going to advance their cause. Thank you.
Senator, and finally, Senator Laura, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman, for allowing me speak here this afternoon. I'd like to welcome the Minister and his officials. Just a quick comment with regard to harness racing. One of the key parts that we've looked at both the greyhound and the horse racing sector is the integrity and the way the regulations are applied to it, and they're run by independent bodies within those sectors. And I know in the greyhound sector we are looking at an independent body to the legislation at the moment, and I think that we need to make sure that is in place before any state funding is given to the harness racing sector. That to me would be key on that. Minister, I do welcome the increase in funding. I know during the recession we found it difficult to maintain the funding that we had for the horse racing sector, but that too was going through a hard period, and as Deputy Penrose has alluded to, there is huge pressure on the horse racing industry at the moment. Those at the top are enjoying the benefits, and we could see it quite clearly, the sales in Goffs last week, the fall sales, that the quality horses are at the very top end of the market, and you have to have the good mare and you have to be put across with a good stallion, are making the money. But the vast bulk of those horses, those foals, that a lot of small breeders in the sector are struggling to overcome the cost of the stallion fees. And that is a huge worry within the sector, and that people may mention the number of people, 15,200 people working in the industry. But a lot of those people are working that have one or two mares, are trying to struggle, and if there's anything we can do for them, it's important that we look at that, and it's not at the top end of the market, which seems to be able to hold its own no matter where it is. But it's those guys that Deputy Penrose has mentioned about too as well. There's also a worry about the competitiveness of Irish racing. And Deputy Penrose has indicated last week there was last Sunday there was a race in the Tri-Town Chase in Navan. 11 were trained by the one trainer. Is that good?
In the first four,
yeah, but is that any good for the industry? You know, and the industry has to look at itself, and we're putting in a lot of money from the state perspective. And there's 15,200, as I mentioned earlier on, employed. They're not all employed by the one trainers or two trainers or three trainers. They may have one or two horses in the train. And HRI has to start looking at what it can do to assist those people. A simple suggestion is that you have a races specifically for owners of one or two horses, or a syndicate race, or something like that. Start thinking outside the box so you can help the smaller people instead of looking after the big guys all the time. I'm going to hope that, Minister, you continue to support the capital spend in racetracks. And as Deputy Penrose alluded to earlier on, there are some racetracks can't afford the 60%. There's 40% state funding, 60% covered by the racetracks. Some of them can't, so haven't been able to upgrade their facilities as a result of that. Maybe you might look at the fact that tier them. Say the smaller racetracks with lower turnovers that provide for the local economy, you could give them up to 70% grant. And then the higher ones, such as your Leopardstown, such as your Corals, such as the other ones too as well, reduce them down a bit so that there is a bit more fairness within the industry. And have a look at that too as well, Minister. We notice that the capital spend has been great in racetracks. I see it in my own track in Naas. They've done tremendous work on it. And they are a small little racetrack. The thing that worries me is that when I look at the Curragh and the money that's been spent over there and the overrun that has been associated with it, and also the parade ring that has been built by engineers, I would think, rather than horsey people. You know, it's too small for the track that's able to hold 30 horses, and it can only hold 21. I don't know where the logic went on that, but I hope the extra funding that's required to adjust that doesn't come from the state, that it has to come from those investors who are supposed to be supervising the facility. Minister, I'm going to talk to you about something that's dear to me and is a hugely integral part of the racing and the horse industry, is the Equine Centre in Naas. It's a worldwide leader in what it does. I know it's a private body and all that, but whatever support you can give it, Minister, I really appreciate it. It is acknowledged that what it does there helps to boost the industry. It also improves the integrity of the industry too as well. And it's been used by the state to assist it in disease control on certain subjects. So, Minister, whatever you can do on that, I really would help support. The betting tax, I've scratched my head in this, and I do agree that we need to take more tax out of it. I would have looked at it, say, are we getting the 1% across the board on all sectors? Are we getting it through the exchanges? Are we getting it through online? Are we getting it through the bookmakers? Are we getting it through the tote, which has an offline or an online presence? And we're not getting it through that. And I would have looked at that. However, it has been decided to put the 2%. It's going to impact on small bookmaking firms up and down the country in the high street in many of our villages or many of our towns. And I would like to see some of the money put in that's been collected from this being put into some sort of a fund to help people with gambling addiction, because it's associated with that, if we can do something on that. I would also like to see that not all the extra money that's been collected goes to the horse racing industry, because I think only about 30–35% of the betting now is associated with horse racing. There was a ridiculous thing last weekend, I don't know if anyone saw it last Friday, golf, in which Tiger Woods played Phil Mickelson. Like, it was absolutely disgraceful that these two fellas played a €200,000 bet that who would have a birdie in the first hole. Right? It was disgraceful to see something like that happening by two icons of the golfing industry to encourage people to gamble. And I thought it was totally wrong. But, Minister, there's an awful lot of the sector, within the sector. Oh, I agree.
Of their own, the golf.
Yes, I agree totally. Yeah, it was a disgrace, but it highlighted the betting industry at its worst. Yeah, at its worst. At its worst. But as I said, 30–35% of betting is on the horse sector. The other is on other variety of sports. And maybe let's look at where we can add funding to other sports which are more inclusive than some of the horse racing sector. I mentioned one other thing that has me a little bugbear of mine is Dundalk Racetrack. Fantastic facility. It's not used enough. You know, it's shut down for most of the summer. There's all-weather racing goes on in the UK all the time. We have this fantastic facility that's used maybe twice a week coming up to Christmas, hardly used after Christmas, and used once a week then after that. Like, there's an opportunity to run race meetings for those small trainers, small syndicates and things like that. Let's look at that. Let's start using our imagination on that. I mentioned about prize fund. I've mentioned about the prize funds and how we can use the prize funds for sort of imaginary type races to get the small people, get them, encourage them. Because as anyone knows, that most of the racing, as Deputy Penrose has alluded to, it's all going into one coffers. When you look at the main races, you can count in one hand the number of owners are associated with it, and it's sad to see. So, Minister, I'm delighted the fact that you've come in here. I have a passion about this sport. I suppose the first time I was brought was about 4 years of age across the fields of Punchestown. I was probably betting. Now that I can't do it, because in those days, under 18s, you had your tote bet, and you went up with your 2 shillings, and if you had 2 shillings or whatever it was, and betted, now kids can't do that.
You realised that whole...
I know. Kids can't do that now, get that enjoyment. We have to start, you know, it's not to encourage people to get, but it's part and parcel of going to a day's racing that. Now, the young fellas that I bring with me, I have to go and do the bets for them. Because they can't go up and enjoy the pleasure that once was. And it doesn't lead to everyone who makes a bet being a gambler. I know that, and I know I have problems with that. But it's part and parcel of the enjoyment of the whole thing. And I think it's a great industry, Minister. I think it's when you look at it, and I've been all over the world racing, it's a great pleasure to go to the small tracks. I remember Ballinrobe on the Naas, and the family were catering those places years ago before. And I saw the industry from all sides of it, and I think it's a great industry. But we need to be able to encourage the small person, the fellow that has the few quid in his pocket, that wants to get involved in a little syndicate, that he has a chance. Thanks, Minister.
Thanks, Senator. A lot of questions there, and some questions obviously be directed for HRI when they come in later on in the year. Okay, over to you, Minister, then, to address the questions.
Thank you, Minister, and our Chairman, and thanks to the members for their questions. And it's obvious that members are deeply interested in the equine industry and indeed the greyhound industry also. And I think the unfortunate position from sitting on this side of this debate is that there's never enough money. There's never enough money in terms of all of the asks. And in the context of what we're doing today, we're very much restricted by the legislation. The legislation provides for the allocation of the funds under the Horse and Greyhound Act, a statutory instrument that provides for the 80-20 split, 80% to HRI, 20% to Board na Gan. So in the context of, say, related issues raised about the Sport Horse Alliance or Horse Sport Ireland or harness racing, it's not within my gift, within the constraints of the legislation at the moment, to allocate from the Horse and Greyhound Fund to any of those, and the funding that they get comes from the generality of the department's allocation. It's not open under the construct of the legislation to allocate under the Horse and Greyhound Fund. And as I said, there is never enough money. And the other point which I'd make, and I think it's reflective of a theme of the contributions, is the top end of the market would survive if HRI was never there. The top end of the market would survive if HRI was never there. Whether it's Listowel or Mallow or Tramore or Kilbeggan or Gordon or Naas or Tipperary or Cahill or Clonmel or Thurles rather, that's in effect where I think there's a need for attention by HRI, and I will be meeting, in fact, later this week with HRI and I know that you will in due course, and I think that's a message that needs to be heard loud and clear. And I make no apology for saying this. In fact, in my first encounter with HRI, and I appreciate we were coming from a situation where, you know, in my first budget, in my engagement with HRI, I made very clearly the point to them that I wanted particular focus on the point-to-point sector. And I think they have responded, in fairness, over the last number of years. That's not to say there isn't more to be done. And I think it's also the case in terms of the smaller people, if I might use that term, in the industry, because, as I said, you know, the top end of the market would survive. But bear in mind, however, it is a very mobile industry. They may survive, but they may not be in Ireland. And that's something we need to be very careful about as well. That we get holistically all of the responses right and proper. But I would say just to Deputy Kinney that, you know, you made reference to one part of the country and land prices and all of that. This is an industry, in fact, if you look at the map of breeding establishments, they're in every one of the counties in the country, in every one of them. Now, they may be more dominant in one or the other, but they are in every county. And you know, it's about those small breeders with 3 or 4 mares. They are really the backbone of the point-to-point system and of the smaller tracts as well. And that's why I would say that, you know, what HRI does, I think, and if you look at the capital investment that they've been involved in, I've been privileged to be in Listowel, in Killarney, in Mallow, to acknowledge the investment that they've put into smaller tracts. And I know that's replicated, and I know there's, you know, it's perhaps more challenging to come up with the matching funds. But if you take in the showpiece investment, you know, the state-of-the-art investment in the Corcoran, that's not at it's in fact a third. So, you know, it's not that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. But I do think these are points that the industry needs to hear. And I certainly will take the views as expressed here to my own engagement with the industry, and I'm sure you will as well. On harness racing, just, you know, in the context of what constraints we have under the Horse and Racing Regulation Act, and the fact that it can't be funded under the statutory instrument that we're talking about today, and just I don't know if I misinterpreted Deputy Penrose's point, but it's 1.28 billion is the cumulative amount up to this point. It's added to every, and it's a lot of money.
650% of an increase from 2001. That's what it is.
Well, no, like it's 2001, 2002, 2003, yeah. 2004. It's every year. It has gone from. It's 1.28 billion.
It's gone from 200 million to 1.3 billion, and that's 650% of an increase over 17 years. It's fantastic. It's way beyond inflation, anyhow.
Yeah, but the year on, yeah. I mean, that is the fact. It has gone from that.
It has.
But it is, and I mean, it is. It's a phenomenal.
It's a phenomenal increase
of support.
So we have to get value for money when you compare it to other issues.
Now, just on the harness racing issue, insofar as. And I think it's important to consider this in the context of the Horse Sport Alliance and Horse Sport Ireland. The harness racing people, and I've had engagement with them, and I know you have, and they're very effective communicators and lobbyists for their sector, and I salute that, as the industry generally is, the equine industry. They're a constituent member of Horse Sport Ireland. The Horse Sport Alliance is a lobbyist group for the sport horse sector, as opposed to, you know, in more or less the show jumping sector. I don't want to be entirely prescriptive about what they're asked. But, I mean, you know, the opening point I made, there's never enough money. We have increased, I think nearly doubled, in fact, from 2014, the funding which we give. In 2014 it was 1.8 million to Horse Sport Ireland, and it's, for 2019 it'll be in the region of 3.5 million. So that's a significant increase. We could spend multiples of it, but I mean there is an important question here. Is it the core function of this department to fund the high performance end of the sport market? They do receive funding from the Department of Tourism and Sport, and there's a question of the appropriate balance. I appreciate that this is a rural enterprise, horses are reared on farms, etc. But there's a question of whether it's a core function of this department to be involved in the level of funding at that high performance end, or is that a function of the sports department, from whom they also get funding? We will engage with Horse Sport Ireland. We had the Indicon report on Horse Sport Ireland. We have said that once the governance structures were right, that we would, respond in terms of the allocation to them. I think we have, in the context of the trajectory of their funding. But they have a lot of ambition, and they have a lot of constituent members, and some constituent members work through Horse Sport Ireland, some work outside Horse Sport Ireland. The harness racing industry is looking for very substantial capital investment. Now, we got their draft five-year plan for the industry on the 12th of October, which was after the budget for 2019 was concluded. So it makes it difficult to make any substantial progress on the range of issues. And I know they're from the track in Leopardstown, or in Portmarnock rather, to an alternative which Fingal local authority may be making available. They are about funding for a staffing complement. And I'm conscious of the fact that if we step into this breach, you don't take on staff for 1 year. There's a recurring commitment. We need evidence of matching funds. We need evidence of governance structures. And to be fair, this is an organisation that I would say is trying to get off the ground. But in terms of the funding we're allocating here today, which is to HRI and to Bord na Gan, they are subject to Controller and Auditor General, scrutiny, etc., accounts, a board. This is an organisation that has yet to get to that level of professional presentation, and we are working with them. We have funded the original Indicon report, the development of their own strategy. We have funded them in terms of investment in various programmes, and we continue to do that. And we would like to see how we could further do things, perhaps even like looking at the stud book. That's an area where we might be able to operate. But in terms, I would think of, say, for example, a racetrack development. Is that something that could be usefully explored under the Sports Capital Programme, rather than under the Department of Agriculture core funding? It's a sports facility. These are issues that we need to kind of explore. And as I said, we got a draft on the 12th of October. There is consideration of that ongoing. But I don't want to throw cold water all over this, but just in the context of the Horse and Greyhound Fund, it's not possible under the legislation to take it from there. We are trying to do it within the existing allocations as much as we possibly can, bearing in mind that they are one of a number of constituent members of Horse Sport Ireland, whose total allocation is 3.5 million from this department. Their harness racing's ask is a very, very, very substantial part of that total allocation, in terms of what the cost might be of developing that facility, what the cost might be of staffing, complement, etc. So we need to explore these things in further detail. We need to make sure that we, every step that we're taking, we are protecting the public interest and the public purse. I think that's important. Deputy Cahill raised and Senator Lawler raised the issue of the single laboratory service. You raised, Deputy Cahill, and Senator Lawler raised the issue of the equine centre. Now, I think there's probably the genesis of something there in terms of collaboration, and this could extend to the greyhound sector as well. That are there, things that are invested in that are transferable, and certainly I would see, and I hope to visit very shortly, the equine centre. That therein is a requirement for very, very substantial capital investment, very, very substantial capital investment. And can we explore a model where you know, something akin to what happened in the Curragh, that might be partially funded by others as well as the state. I think that's important. But equally important is if we put in that kind of investment, can we get a return for everybody in terms of, you know, what the Equine Centre does now in terms of diagnosis and management and prevention and research, and giving the industry here the international reputation standing that it has because of a facility like the Equine Centre. Can we use the expertise therein then to assist, you know, for example, the greyhound industry in terms of their laboratory requirements, integrity and all of that? I think that's something where we could see, you know, a useful collaborative approach. Are there things in terms of education and training that the broader equine sector needs to do that perhaps RACE has done and the equine industry under HRI has done, that we can leverage some support, you know, benefit to other aspects? And I made this point on occasions to key stakeholders that this might be something that should be, you know, explored to a greater detail. And I certainly see the Equine Centre as one of those areas where I think it can deliver. I mean, on the issue of on-track bookmakers and on the betting tax generally, they are issues that are not for this department. But I would make the point that the on-track bookmakers certainly add colour to a race meeting. Mind you, I mean, anybody that's going, these are the things now that most people bet on. You know, that's the reality, whether we like it or not. So, you know, it's just begins to be. But these are the things that most people bet on today, and you know, they do. You know, I certainly would like to see, you know, that tradition of on-course betting continuing, and you know, all the supports necessary and soft supports outside of the tax system in terms of location, etc. You know, being an issue that race courses and HRI, where possible, can assist with. I think I've covered.
Now, this Kenny's question is regarding the long-term plan for the two industries. That the point he was making, I think, was that to make them sustainable long-term, self-sustainable.
Well, I mean, I think that like all of them, like the greyhound industry has a strategic plan. The HRI has a plan. We now have the Indicon report, which is the backdrop for the horse sport sector. So, I mean, we've no shortage of strategic planning. The point I would make is, without this level of funding, as I said earlier, the top end of the market will continue to survive. This funding is critical to the lower end of the market sector in particular. And as I said, there are strategic plans. I mean, if the question is making an assumption that you could get to a situation where this industry will stand without state support, I don't see that happening. And as I said, the top end of it might, but the entire edifice of the Irish equine industry is built on a foundation of the small owners and breeders and operators. And if we lose sight of that, we very quickly could have a situation where the base dies out and the mobility of the industry becomes very apparent very quickly in terms of relocation elsewhere. And that's something we need to guard against.
Cahill has a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to the Minister, I want to go back to harness racing and trying to get harness racing off the ground. Now, I think the point that Senator Lawler made here beside me about Dundalk Racecourse, I personally think that harness racing could use that facility, and I think that's where they should be going, and it shouldn't be trying to establish a new track. I think that facility is ideal for what they're trying to do. But like, if you take it, the 5 races they held there, Minister, and 850,000 beds, if we take 2% of that, that's 17,000 in revenue. We take the betting tax off it. So, you know, this industry, in my view, has the potential to, I won't say self-finance, but definitely contribute if they can get off the ground. But unless now they're, like, I'm in here just 3 years, they've been coming to us, knocking on our door that kind of time anyway. Whether they're coming before that or not, I don't know. But they're definitely knocking on the door that length of time now and making representations. The French have put their money where their mouth is with the industry, and they have put money on the table. And I just feel that if we don't make a concrete step forward now like you can only keep an industry like that so long on the embryo stage. And I think if there's not something concrete done to try and get, like, one race meet in a year isn't going to be enough for people to keep the horses, or for the industry to develop. And like in 2019, if we don't expand on that activity, I think that this project will go backwards rather than forwards. And like, they have put a number of individuals have put huge effort into it. They have produced a strategic plan. Now, you say, Minister, I'm not doubting you, you say that it wasn't ready for budget time. They say different, but lobby groups can always stretch the truth a bit. So we won't start getting into an argument about when the plan came on the table. But I feel unless we make a meaningful contribution to this industry, they are going to go backwards. They've put an awful lot of work into it. They've shown that the industry can attract betting outside the country, and I think we need to make a commitment to it, Minister. And like 850,000 on 5 races in Dundalk was a substantial figure of betting, and to do that on a once-off occasion, I think was very, very significant. We've talked about provincial racetracks there a good few times today. They wouldn't have that in 5 or 6 meetings, don't mind on 5 races, bet on the toes. So, I think unless we take a step forward here, I'm afraid that this aspect of horse racing will take a lot of steps backwards.
Deputy, to conclude, Minister, on that point.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have put our money where our mouth is. We have invested. I mean, and we need to be careful that we in terms of public funds, that we move in a way that is appropriate. And, in terms of the Indicon report in 2017 was 57,000. The 5-year plan for the organisation, which we are paying for, is in excess of 60,000. We are paying for their 5-year plan. Is in excess of 60,000 in 2017. We gave over 40,000 on equine technical support in 2018. There was additional funding under the same heading in 2017. We had 27,000 for welfare support. You'll be aware some of that was spent in Tipperary on the issue of harness racing on public roads and trying to increase awareness and welfare, etc. So we have put public funds into the sector. Now, as I said earlier, like they're one of many affiliates of Horse Sport Ireland, and I'm conscious, like, if people feel that they can go outside the umbrella body and work, will every affiliate of Horse Sport Ireland then feel what's the point of being part of a parent organisation and think that they can campaign independently? I mean, we have to be careful how we proceed and that it's appropriate. Your observations regarding Dundalk track are interesting. They had a meeting there. Is that something that could be resurrected rather than, I mean, the requirement that they're pursuing in terms of capital investment was originally, I think, several 100,000 was what was required in the context of Portmarnock. It then became multiples of that in terms of a new venue in North County Dublin on the Dublin-Meath border. We need to make sure that what we're doing is sustainable. Anybody can buy a track and develop a track, but is it sustainable long term? Is it the right thing to do? Are there opportunities to further, have further meetings in Dundalk, for example, which you say yourself it would be the right thing, rather than the big capital investment? Exploring further, if we put in funding, is there matching funding coming in terms of staffing supports, in terms of accommodation offices, etc.? None of which is there now. So I mean, we are working with these people. We have a draft plan since the 12th of October, but they are one constituent member of many in Horse Sport Ireland. So we need to work. We need to make sure that we're fair to everybody as well.
Okay. Any further questions before we finish up on this point, this area? Okay, if there's nothing else, that concludes our consideration of the motion. According to standing orders, A message was sent to the Clerk of Dáil and Clerk of the Senate saying this committee has completed its consideration of the motion. Is this agreed? Okay. I thank the Minister and officials for coming before the committee today to discuss this important matter. If there's no further business in this area, I'd just like to suspend this part of the meeting to allow the officials to leave and the other officials to come in before the committee. So suspend for a couple of minutes. Okay, just remind members of witness to make sure mobile phones are completely turned off, please. We're dealing with this is the final part of this particular meeting today. We're dealing with the forthcoming EU Council meeting about agriculture and fisheries, the Sea Fisheries Sustainability Impact Assessment. I'd like to welcome the Minister and his officials to the meeting. Thank you for coming before the committee today to brief the committee in advance of the next Agri-Fishery Council meeting, specifically on the Sea Fisheries Sustainability Impact Assessment. Just have to remind you again the issue of privilege. Members are reminded of long-standing pension practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charge against either person outside the House and officially by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Mr. Ashley, make your opening statement, please.
Chairman, I welcome this opportunity to present this Sustainability Impact Assessment to the Committee. As in previous years, a rigorous assessment has been undertaken to examine the implications for Ireland of the European Union's Commission's proposals for the fixing of total allowable catches for the coming year. The EU Commission proposal was issued on the 7th of November and a number of non-papers updating the proposals have issued since. As the Committee will be aware, the final arrangements for 2019 are due to be negotiated at the Council scheduled for the 17th and 18th of December. The levels of total allowable catch and the quotas for Ireland will be determined at that meeting following intensive negotiations with Member States and the Commission. The waters surrounding Ireland contain some of the most productive fishing grounds in the European Union. We have a duty of care to protect our biological richness, and as such they must be managed responsibly and sustainably. Ireland's total allocation of quotas in 2018 amounted to a total value of €266 million. There are also very valuable inshore species which are not subject to EU tax, for example crab, whelk, scallop and lobster, and are fished by the Irish fleet inside our 6-mile coastal zone. The process of preparing for the Council is now well underway. The proposal covers stocks which are not subject to third-party international agreements and are in the main whitefish and prawn stocks. Stocks which are subject to ongoing international negotiations, such as mackerel, are not included in the proposal as of yet, with the exception of mackerel. While those negotiations are ongoing, we do know at this stage that there will be at least a 20% cut for 2019 and possibly more. 2019 will see the full implementation of the landing obligation or discards ban. This was a central element of the reform of the Common Fisheries Policy and was agreed by all Member States as well as the European Parliament. It will cease the dumping of perfectly good fish at sea and end the catching and discarding of juvenile fish. This is a common sense goal, but the obligation comes with a significant challenge. We must be determined to face these challenges head on if we are to ensure the sustainability of our vibrant coastal communities that depend on healthy fish stocks. There are a number of challenges that can only be addressed by common action from the Commission and the Member States, and I will pursue these issues vigorously. Moving on to the proposals themselves, they are based on formal advice received from ICES, the independent international body with responsibility for advising on the state of fish stocks. It also takes account of the views of the STECF, the Scientific, Technical and Economic Committee for Fisheries, which gives the Commission its views on the economic, technical and social impacts of the scientific advice. In order to inform my negotiations at the December Fisheries Council, I have had an assessment of the impact of the Commission proposals undertaken. To facilitate the assessment, an open consultation was initiated, whereby stakeholders were asked to submit their comments and observations on the Commission proposal for fishing opportunities for 2019. From November 7th, an online web portal, www.fishingnet.ie, was activated to enable the transmission of electronic submissions for consideration. These portals remained open until November 21st, and in all, 3 submissions were received by the closing date. The full content of all the submissions received by the deadline will be published on the fishingnet.ie website. In addition to the written submissions, I convened a meeting of stakeholders, fishing industry representatives and environmental NGOs on the 23rd of November last. The purpose of this meeting was to give a further opportunity to the main stakeholders to outline their positions on the many aspects of this proposal. I would like to thank all of the various stakeholders for their contributions to this impact assessment. As always, there were a range of views among stakeholders. However, there were also commonalities, and I agree with many of the sentiments expressed through the consultation process. These include a call for adherence to the available scientific advice to enable responsible and appropriate management decisions to be taken. This, however, must be balanced with the concern that major cuts to the tax could have severe socio-economic impacts. It is in that context that my clear position is that I will not support cuts unless I am satisfied that they are absolutely necessary and fully supported by rigorously assessed, clear scientific evidence. A very serious concern in the proposal is the fact that the Commission has, for a number of key stocks, not allocated quotas to Member States in accordance with our respective shares. Instead, they propose a bycatch tax that would be available to any Member State. This is completely unacceptable to me. It would considerably dilute our share of key stocks and lead to a race to the bottom or Olympic fishing. Such an outcome would be devastating for our fleets and the sustainability of the stocks in question. I am working closely with other relevant Member States to ensure that these proposals are dropped. Apart from this issue, I also have concerns with some of the TAC level proposals. For example, haddock in the Celtic Sea minus 14%, cod in the Celtic Sea minus 58%. This is also a union TAC. For our most important demersal stock, nephrops, there is a mixture of advice depending on the area. While some areas are showing an increase in abundance, there is significant reductions in others. In overall terms, the collective advice is for a 32% cut. The Marine Institute are currently examining the advice to determine if all relevant information has been considered in its formulation. Once that analysis is complete, I will be able to assess whether or not there is a case to be made to mitigate to some degree the scale of the cut proposed. Following the consultation process and the expert advice of the Marine Institute, I do not believe that the full scale of these reductions in quota is either justified or necessary. I will accept cuts where the scientific advice available to me is unequivocal, for example in Celtic Sea herring. There is some good news in the proposals for certain stocks. Cod, haddock and plaice in the Irish Sea will all see increases, as will megrims, monk and hake in others. The Marine Institute and BIM have again this year made an invaluable contribution to the assessment of the Commission's proposal, which is contained in the Sea Fisheries Sustainability Impact Assessment before you today. I would like to briefly set out the findings contained in that assessment. From a purely biological perspective, the Marine Institute's view, which coincides with the ICE's view, is that there has been an improvement in the status of some fish stocks. However, others remain a concern. In the impact assessment, the Marine Institute summarises the pressure on the 74 stocks dealt with in the 2018 stock book and compares this assessment with the same evaluation presented in previous year's stock books. There is a higher number of sustainably fished stocks, 32 in total, and percentage 43% in 2018 compared with last year. The percentage and number of stocks, 22% and 16 stocks overfished, has also increased in 2018, whereas the stocks with unknown status declined slightly from 28 to 26, or in percentage terms from 38 to 35%. The specific details for all stocks are available in the document which has been laid before the Dáil and in the stock book which was prepared by the Marine Institute and is available on their website. The socio-economic impact assessment of the Commission's proposals does not fully account for Ireland's share of fishing opportunities. The current proposals exclude a number of important stocks, mackerel, horse mackerel and blue whiting, where the final European Union total allowable catch and Member States' quotas depend on external third country agreements. If agreed as they currently stand, the Commission's proposal would see net reduction in fishing opportunity, or quotas, of 15% by volume and 17% by value. In financial terms, this amounts to a direct income reduction of €34.67 million. These figures can be further explained as follows. A net reduction in fishing opportunity for the demersal sector, which is whitefish and nephrops, of 5.7% by volume and 15% by value, with a direct income reduction of some €20 million. A potential minimum net reduction in fishing opportunity for the pelagic sector of 18% by volume and 20% by value, with a direct income reduction of €14.67 million. In terms of a regional analysis of these figures, for northwest stocks in Area 6, there would be a 26% increase in fishing opportunity, valued at €2.1 million for the demersal, that's whitefish and prawn fleets. This will directly impact the ports of Greencastle and Killybegs. For the Irish Sea, Celtic Sea and West Coast, which is known as Area 7, stocks, it is estimated that there will be a 14% reduction in fishing opportunity for the demersal fleet. This reduction is valued at €24.31 million and will directly impact the ports of Clogherhead, Howth, Dunmore East, Kilmore Quay, Dingle, Castletownbere and Rossaveel, as well as many other smaller ports. In addition to the direct losses to the fleet, income is also lost from the processing sector as a direct result of reduced catches, and in a number of ancillary industries, net making, chandlery, engineering, refrigeration, etc. This will obviously have a knock-on effect for employment, and BIM further estimates on the basis of the most recent employment surveys of the catching sector that these reductions could impact 500 full-time and part-time jobs. This could occur either through reduced incomes, partial layoffs or redundancies in the seafood sector. The proposals do not include the Hague preferences, which are a safety net for the Irish fleet on specific stocks where total allowable catches are in decline. Essentially, these are additional amounts of quota that Ireland and the UK claim for important whitefish stocks. Many member states object strenuously to their application as the additional quota comes off their allocation. Ensuring that the preferences are applied will be a key political objective for me in the negotiations. The loss of these allocations in 2019 will amount to at least 1,222 tonnes of fish, with a direct value of €2.4 million and an associated impact on between 40 to 50 full-time and part-time jobs, either through reduced incomes, partial layoffs or redundancies. To conclude, I can fully concur with the findings of the Sea Fisheries Sustainability Impact Assessment. It highlights the significant impact that the current proposals could have on the Irish fishing industry. Significant challenges lie ahead over the next 3 weeks, but I will do my utmost to agree a fair and balanced package for Ireland that ensures the continued vibrancy of our industry and the long-term sustainability of our stocks. Finally, I would like to thank and acknowledge all those who contributed to the production of this impact assessment and look forward to the debate on the conclusions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Minister. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Minister, and your staff for coming here today. And for your opening statement. I suppose one of the key things in all of this, and it's the big issue that's facing everyone in the whole fishing industry and in so many other industries, is Brexit and the impact it's going to have, and where that's going to leave us in respect of all of this. The impact, particularly in regard to other fleets from other countries, from other EU countries, who would have traditionally fished in what will, and we assume Brexit is going to power ahead, will become British waters, and that their displacement will probably put pressure onto the stocks in Irish waters, or what would be Irish waters if we were not in the EU. So I just wonder, in the context of that, is there any sense from the point of view of discussions you're having at a European level as to a recognition of the huge impact that this will have on the Irish fishing sector, and that there needs to be, if not a full, certainly a review of the common fisheries policy and of where we're going with it in the context of Brexit? Because if you step back and you look at even the whole map of Europe, Britain leaving takes a huge amount of the fishing waters out of the European context, and puts us in a position, and certainly from where we are in Ireland, for Irish fishing vessels will either have to go through British waters or into international waters to get back into EU waters again. That's the way it's gone with when you look at the situation there. And while you know what we're discussing here this evening, and the total allowable catch, and where we're going with all of that, and the pressures that's on the various sectors, and all of that comes into play, personally I believe a lot of the reason for all of those pressures is because of the overfishing, or the pressure that comes from the very large fishers that we have from other European states, that comes into our waters and takes a lot of our fish, particularly the ones with what we call the super trawlers, or the huge big trawlers, and the impact of them will be even more severe if things progress as we expect to progress with Brexit. Thank you, Chairman.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Deputy, and I think whereas the December Council is critical for the year-to-year quotas that it secures for the industry, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what is the biggest challenge to the Irish fishing industry for the years ahead, and it is obviously in the context of Brexit. And in that context, we have been engaged in a very intensive way with the industry here over the period. Indeed, even before the UK vote on the 23rd of June 2016, but certainly ramped up significantly since that. And the industry's analysis and our own analysis are ad idem on the scale of the challenge that the industry faces in the context of the UK leaving in circumstances where they would control access and quota in their waters. We catch, for example, in the context of our most valuable fishery, 60% of our mackerel, over 40% of our second most valuable stock in UK waters. So we have been, very much working hand in hand with the industry in the context of that challenge, and building an alliance across Europe of other member states who are equally impacted in terms of the exposure of their industry to UK waters. Spain, France, ourselves, the Belgians, the Dutch, the Danes, the Germans, the Swedes, I think I've got them all, have been, part of a platform that we have been instrumental in constructing and feeding in our shared analysis on, what it is we want in the context of the Brexit negotiations. And that has been mirrored by a similar platform constructed by an industry alliance. And there isn't an iota of a difference between our shared analysis on the challenge and what it is we want from the outcome of these negotiations. And what we clearly want is continued access, effectively the status quo. And in terms of how we prosecute that, we want to make sure that in terms of the future relationship, that these issues are dealt with in the context of the future trading relationship. Not in isolation, but that in terms of the UK's demands, in terms of market access for its products, financial services, aviation, pharmaceuticals, the car industry, that we want the negotiations on fisheries to be inextricably linked with those negotiations. And in terms of the agreement that is there now, the draft, the withdrawal treaty and the accompanying political declaration, we are where we set out, where we wanted to be when we set out originally. So that doesn't mean that there's any room for complacency. It means on the basis that the withdrawal treaty is approved, the status quo will apply in terms of the common fisheries policy up to the end of 2020. During that period, in the context of what's in the political declaration, there would be negotiations around agreeing issues to do with fisheries. But we're very clear on what we want. We want a continuation of the status quo, and we believe in the context of what the UK asks are, in terms of a close trading relationship, that it is right and proper that those two issues would not be separated, but that they would be inextricably linked.
At the same time, and I even watched Theresa May on the television yesterday evening when she was out selling her deal, if you like. And one of the big points she was making was that, UK fishing vessels would be outside now of the common fisheries policy, and that was a selling point for her. And I just wonder, in the context of that, and it seems to be the situation that one of the big reasons why Brexit is happening is because they want to get away from the regulations of Europe. They want to get away from the constraints that Europe puts on them. And if in that context they begin to overfish their waters, what impact will that have when we come back in a few years' time to have a total allowable catch, where we find that there is a situation, because the fish don't know where the border or the line is. Certainly the border on the land is hard enough to establish, and when it comes to the border on the sea, it's even worse. So I'm just very conscious that we could be in a situation in a number of years' time where we could be looking at this December meeting coming up, where it would be a much starker problem than we have at present, and it's poor enough at present.
Well, look, I mean, as I said, we were very clear from the outset what our requirement was at this stage, and it was, working with the industry, not in isolation, but with other member states who have fishing fleets who are equally exposed to a greater or lesser extent to UK waters, and prosecuting our asks through the Barnier Task Force. And in terms of what's agreed now, and this has been acknowledged, I think, by industry leaders here, we are where we set out to be. Obviously, in the context of the transition period, very critical negotiations will assuming the withdrawal agreement is approved, and that remains to be seen. In the transition period, those negotiations on the future trading relationship will be undertaken, and specifically there's reference to concluding those as they relate to fish at an early stage.
Thanks, Minister. I'm sorry, Deputy Kenny.
No, I was just going to say in the context of all of this, is there an argument to be made to put additional protections for the Irish fishing waters to ensure that it isn't overfished by other EU? Like I know the commonality of purpose and everyone working together and all of that is all very well and good, and it's the appropriate way to move forward. But in the cold light of day, when it comes down to a scarce resource and everyone trying to make money from it, we could be in a position where others would take advantage of that situation. And I just wonder, are we at a stage where we need to be putting forward a very strong platform that we need to protect our waters to ensure that that doesn't happen?
No, I mean, we're part of the common fisheries policy, and we're part, as I said, in the context of Brexit, of an alliance with other member states who have fishing interests. And if we were to breach from that, apart from the bad faith, in the context of the common fisheries policy and relative stability, which is kind of the shares that each member state has, what we would effectively be saying to those that support our analysis and have been part of kind of getting us to where we're at, is that we want some of their fish. And that is the surest way to isolate and leave us vulnerable in the context of the rest of those member states. When it comes to December Council, we will all fight each other tooth and nail for the best maximum share possible for our industry, taking into account kind of the advice and the socio-economic impact and the journey towards MSY, etc. But in this, we have a shared interest on a very critical issue. And if we start flying solo on it, it really would be counterproductive.
And I'm not suggesting we fly solo or we would somehow or other act in any way in bad faith. But is there not an argument to be made that we need to convince all of the other parties in Europe that we have a unique situation here? And we have a unique situation where our biggest neighbour that has a huge waters all around us practically, and that they're not going to be under the control of a total allowable catch at all, whereas we are.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting area. I certainly wouldn't believe there is anything to be gained at all, and the industry shares this view, to at this stage being anything other than 100% in prosecuting the analysis that we've made with others. And if we were to show, that we now wanted in some way to protect Irish waters for Irish boats, we would alienate. I mean, we fish, 60% of mackerel, in the context of the common fisheries policy and access to community waters, etc. In a way, the common fisheries policy goes to show that it's a community resource, and we fish 60% at the moment of our mackerel, for example, in UK waters. We fish, our trawlers go elsewhere in terms of what might be described as other countries' waters, but equally they come into ours, and we have a very big, 200-mile zone, obviously. But it would be really a serious misjudgment if we were to now talk about reopening relative stability or the common fisheries policy. That's for a later stage, and when that happens, we will negotiate to get the best possible deal. But at this moment in time, what unites us is really, really, really important. And the things that divide us or may divide us in the future are not things that we should explore now, because they would be counterproductive.
McConalogue, have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson, and apologies that I wasn't here previously at another meeting. But thanks for I've read your opening statement, Minister, and thanks for taking the time to come in and meet with the committee on this important issue. Obviously, the outline that you've given is quite concerning in relation to the overall potential impact if it works out as has been outlined by yourself without any change. I know you've indicated that we're talking overall for the fishing sector a proposal which would see a 15% reduction in volume and a 17% reduction in value. Can I ask you, obviously this is a starting position and you're going to have to fight the battle on behalf of the country, working with other member states over the coming 2 or 3 weeks. In terms of where we were at this time last year, with regard to what the proposed reductions were and where it ended up after at the conclusion of negotiations, as an indication as to what is possible in terms of the negotiating process. Can you remind us in terms of how it finished up last year based on the position we'd have been in at this particular point? Also then, just in relation to the ongoing cumulative impact of reductions or changes over the last few years, where are we at? In terms of the cumulative impact over the last few years, the last 4, 5, 6 years, have we seen reductions every year, or has there been some increases overall in some of those years, just in terms of to assess the impact on the fishing sector in general in recent times? In relation to the Hague preferences, you indicated in your statement that that's not agreed, that they will be applied. And has there been any years where they haven't actually been applied following negotiations, and how confident are you that they certainly will be applied this year? And I would have thought and hoped that, given the pressure we're under from a Brexit point of view, that there would be maybe a little bit more solidarity from other member states this year. I know, obviously, that that's counterposed by the fact that the British government would benefits from them as well, which is certainly a complicating factor there, and I would accept that. But just if you could elaborate a little bit on that, please. And then one other point I wanted to raise with you as well in relation to total allowable catches. You indicated that a very serious concern you have is that in the proposal, the Commission, for a number of key stocks, have not allocated quotas to member states in accordance with their respective shares, and instead propose a total allowable catch would be available to any member state. That obviously would be very concerning. That has never been the case in the past, has it? And certainly, I would hope that is something that can be averted here as well. And basically, if you could elaborate a little bit on that, please, as well. Thank you, Chairperson.
Deputy Minister.
Deputy, I don't have the figures which you're talking about or seeking, but I'll endeavour to get them. I don't have them at hand in terms of the cumulative impact over the last number of years or the specific figures for last year. But you know, I recall some of them last year in terms of, say, for example, Celtic Sea herring. There was a proposed cut of 60%, I think, and we ended up with a 30% cut there. And, you know, Nefrops, for example, you know, when you applied Hague preferences, I think we went up 15%. I mean, under the Common Fisheries Policy, the Commission is on a journey by 2020, this is what was agreed, to fishing under what's called MSY, that you'll only fish every stock at what's the sustainable yield the stock can give without putting it under pressure to keep itself regenerated year on year. And that plus the discards ban, which is that you have to land everything, are two issues that are giving rise to very considerable challenges this year. Now, if you add into that the issue around the Hague preferences, which is a device that has been used where a stock is in decline, it's applied to the calculation so that in those circumstances we get this was predicated on a case that was prosecuted back in the 80s, that we were in a way shortchanged when the fisheries policy was established in 1982, I think was the establishment of the Common Fisheries Policy, that our industry was in some way disadvantaged, so we got Hague preferences where stocks are going down. We get a little bit more than everybody else. So there is, across other member states, there is every year a kick against the application of the Hague preferences. It's complicated this year because the UK is going out the door, so we will be the only, they were our ally in the context of those negotiations. As they go out the door, members will feel that we are more vulnerable on the Hague preferences. That's notwithstanding the fact that we've had, you know, a shared endeavour in terms of Brexit, etc. But this is about what will be fished next year, and people feel that everything is fair game in the context of those negotiations, and the Brexit thing is parked. That is a worry for us in terms of the loss of the UK as an ally in the context of the Hague preferences. Now, there is also a concern around, to some extent, a kind of an unholy alliance emerging between the UK and Spain on what I refer to in the negotiations as union tax. That's where in certain species there would be no individual state allocations or quotas. There would be a headline quota for a species, and we feel that that would be hugely detrimental to our interests. And we've been kind of working with other member states who would feel equally challenged by this arrangement. Spain, because in a lot of these species they don't already have quotas, feel that they could make a killing on this arrangement. It would lead to everybody setting out on day one of 2019 and trying to fish the total quota as quickly as possible, what I referred to in the speech as kind of Olympic fishing. And you could have every boat tied up by the 1st of April. And that really, wouldn't take into account, for example, when the market is strongest for particular species, and everybody would go hell for leather at it to make sure that they were, regardless of what the market was, etc. So we're quite concerned about that, but working with other member states to try and convince the Commission that that's not a wise way to approach things. I mean, the background to the negotiations always is there's scientific advice from ICES. BIM is involved in kind of the feeding in analysis on the science of stocks. And then we have to take into account, the science on the one hand and the socio-economic impact on rural and coastal communities on the other, and try and find a balance. Sometimes we're criticised by the NGOs because they feel we are on the wrong side of that line, and on the other, invariably then if you go out too far on the other side, those people who are employed either catching or processing will feel that we didn't take into account their concerns. So it's a balancing act, across a range of different species. As I said in my opening remarks, there are some species where the reports are reasonable for 2019, and some where they're particularly challenging. I don't know if I covered everything, Charlie.
Yeah, I think. And has there been any cases in the past where the total allowable catches, the quota hasn't been shared out on the basis of member state shares, or has it always been done in that every state gets its share? That would be a new departure, would it, if they went down that route, which you're talking about, Spain and the UK coming together on?
In the context, sorry, Deputy, would you repeat the question? I'm just.
Yeah, your concern in relation to the Olympic fishing as such, that would be a new departure that hasn't happened before.
Oh, it would be entirely, yeah, and it would be in breach of the common fisheries policy, relative stability principle. That therein everybody's share was determined, and what it would be kind of saying, right, there's no national quota for this species. It's an EU quota. Go at it hell for leather because you're landing everything.
Yes.
And we feel that would really be a retrograde step.
So in that context, given that it's only the UK and Spain that are pushing that at this point in time, you'd be in a pretty strong position strategically with other member states to fight against that, would you?
We would like to think that, but I mean, we don't underestimate. I mean, Spain in the common fisheries policy is Mr. Fish. There's no point in saying otherwise, they see a real opportunity here. I mean, it would be a huge problem for us. We understand the complexities to do with the landing obligation. The industry here has been very proactive in terms of new gear, fish mesh or net mesh sizes, etc., in terms of trying to, meet the challenges around the landing obligation. But in a lot of our fisheries, which are mixed fisheries, in contrast with, say, other fisheries in the Baltics or whatever, where they're clean fisheries. In other words, you go to catch cod today, you'll only catch cod. In our situation of mixed fisheries, you'll bring in a mixed bag of stuff, and you could find that, one species caught early on will choke the opportunities for a whole host of other species. So the Commission's response is for this zero tack and allow everybody to go hell for leather at it without having an individual quota for each member state. We think that's a really damaging proposition for our interests. I'm just, Deputy McConalogue, on your earlier questions, some data have just been handed here. Overall quotas increased from 2015 to 2017, but in 2018 the volume of quota decreased by 8% in volume and by 1% in value. The quotas in 2017 were the highest since 2002, and that's the position we're trying to defend as we go into the 2019 negotiations.
And just in relation to the landing obligation and the discards ban, so
land everything now.
Yeah, so I mean, just the practicalities of how that works in relation to different species of fish being brought on board, and how that works in relation to quota caps for those species. You're saying that that's the reason the Spanish and the UK are coming forward with their tinkering with
these would be in species that they have had no track record or quota in. Now they would have maybe perhaps previously swapped with other member states to try and deal with issues which they had, but they see this zero state quota now as a free-for-all to anybody to go out and fish and land.
So under the discards ban, with regards to those fishermen now have to land everything, even things they might not have a quota for, how is that operating in practice then in relation to them landing that, despite maybe not having quotas for certain species?
There are industry forums, quota management advisory committees dealing with how we try and deal with this discards issue. As I said, the industry here has been, I would say, leaders in the context of the Common Fisheries Policy in terms of trying to develop new technologies in terms of mesh size, etc., so that you have escape hatches and larger mesh sizes, so that you're not catching juvenile fish, etc., dealing with all of this, otherwise species that you would be obliged to discard otherwise. So from 1st of January 2019, we have to land everything. And the danger is that when you come in and you've been out maybe catching one species, you'll come in with a percentage of another species for which you have a very low quota, and hey presto, because it's a very low quota, that becomes a choke from going out and fishing quotas for which you still have a quota available for. So we don't see that the Commission's response in terms of zero quotas for member states, but just a union tack as a way to deal with that.
How do we deal with that, though? I mean, how is it being dealt with? Obviously, the total discards ban is coming in now, but there may be more flexibility up to now. But how do we do that in terms of different fishermen have quotas for different things, but they're going to be required now by law to land everything? So, how do we prevent the choke scenario where a fisherman can't go out because he might catch something he doesn't have any more quota for?
Well, there's no point in saying otherwise. It's a real challenge for member states and for the Commission, and I think it'll take the best endeavour of the industry and the processors in terms of sharing data to arrive at a situation where we can meet the obligation without having the consequent impact on landing, closing off the opportunity to fish stocks for which we still have quota remaining. And I presume it will require, for example, trading opportunities, swapping opportunities with other member states at an earlier stage, perhaps to make sure that we have maintain capacity to continue to fish where we still have quota. But it's really a challenging one to resolve.
And can I ask you just to, it was mooted that there would be a 60 in relation to mackerel. There was potentially going to be a 60% cut in terms of the mackerel quota. I see in your opening statement you're indicating that may be a minimum, maybe down to 20% potentially, though could be more. Can you just elaborate in terms of where we're at in relation to that and how it's got to 20 from the move to 60?
These are the what's called the coastal state negotiations. So there are negotiations between the European Union, Norway and other stakeholders, including the Faroes. I think that's the Iceland has a quota as well. So those negotiations, I think the original ICE's advice was in the region of 60%. The Norwegians came in with a view that they would not cut below 20%. The negotiations have been ongoing. There have been several rounds of them at this stage, including one round in Clonakilty, a couple of rounds in London. They're not concluded yet, but pardon the pun, I think the landing spot is envisaged to be around the figure quoted in the speech, but it's not concluded yet.
Okay. And just finally, Chairperson, just while we're discussing matters marine, more parochial question to you, Minister. It's in relation to Greencastle Harbour, in relation to the breakwater project, which had been funded by your department under previous governments to a certain level, and which was mothballed and is half finished. It's obviously not one of the state harbours, one of the 7 under the control of the state, but your department previously had a specific budget for these types of projects. It would be of tremendous advantage, obviously, to that port, to Greencastle Harbour, to actually have that project finished. Can you update us in relation to where things are at with that particular project, and as to whether you're making progress with regard to reinstating a fund which can actually deliver, finish out the project which your department started in Greencastle, but also deliver in similar projects in the future?
Well, I'm aware of the Deputy's interest and his constituency colleagues' interest in this issue, and as you rightly say, it's not one of the 6 state-owned piers, but I mean, I know there are efforts underway across government to see how a funding solution might be found for that. But at this stage, it's not one that's on the radar for the capital programme for 2019 in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine.
And I just make the point on that, Minister. I do believe it's something that should be kept within the Department of Agriculture, as it was the funding, the parent department previously in relation to funding of it. I know there is some discussion in relation to the Rural Regeneration Fund, but I would counsel in relation to that the Rural Regeneration Fund, in my view, would be about trying to start new projects and trying to develop enterprise and initiative freshly in parts of the country. And I do think it's important that a project like this, especially one that's half finished, agriculture being the parent funding department previously, that agriculture should actually indeed finish the project out and instate a fund which can actually provide for that as well.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's the property of the local authority, and I know the department were previously involved in it, but it would have been in the sense that, as in the work being done by the local authority, funded from the department. In that context, I don't think it really matters what funding line it gets, as long as the work is completed. And as I said, whilst it's not one of the 6 state-owned ones, of which I'm sure you know, Killybegs will be proceeding in 2019 with pier extension. I know that there are, as you other efforts underway, but I don't think really it would matter to Donegal County Council, who would obviously ultimately be the contracting body, who was funding it, as long as the work was done.
I suppose, just to I'll finish off on this, I won't elongate the meeting, but it would matter to this extent, Minister, in that if something which is a half-finished project, which was funded by the Department of Agriculture, would now use up, previously was now going to use up funding which could have been available otherwise for new initiatives, then it means that funding which could have been finished out by the department which started the job is now starting other projects because it's taking out of the regeneration fund to actually finish a job which this department started.
As you're aware, we do fund a scheme through local authorities. The problem with this one is that its cost is multiples of the conventional local authority scheme. And apart from those, there's a very considerable shopping list from the 6 state-owned harbours, including the one closest to us here, in Howth in terms of dredging, and significant investment underway already in some, including Castledownbere, to happen in 2019 in Killybegs. But there's no shortage of capital projects in the department on the marine side that we could be funding. And as I said, for Greencastle, as long as the work is done, I don't think we should be, overly concerned, because there will be no shortage of projects that we can and will be doing in the Department of Marine or in the fishery side.
Okay, members. Mr. Concluded.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no further questions. I'd like to thank the Minister and his officials for coming forward to me today to brief the committee on this particular very important matter, and to wish the Minister and his officials every success over the next number of weeks in very difficult negotiations. And thank the members for their patience here as well today. The meeting stands adjourned until next Tuesday, the 4th of December at 3 p.m, when we have a select committee next Tuesday. Okay, thank you very much, members.